Hey guys, tonight we drift into the drowsy folds of ancient myth, where olive trees sigh in the breeze and golden sunsets stretch long across cracked marble columns. You're floating just above the dusty earth of a world that's half forgotten, half imaginary, where the gods bicker, mortals grumble, and every now and then, accidentally, someone invents poetry. You're following someone, though it's hard to say why. His robe glows faintly like an afterimage of the sun, and his footsteps crunch even when there's no gravel. He's muttering under his breath. And not just any god, nope, it's Apollo, radiant charioteer of the sun, slayer of serpents, god of music and reason, currently having a bit of a divine tantrum. You probably won't survive this if he notices you, but hey, good thing you're not technically in the myth, just listening. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, drop your location and what time it is where you are. Always fun to see who's dozing off from where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Delphi, well, near it. The famous temple looms behind you, where priests and priestesses babble cryptic messages into bowls of steam. But Apollo isn't there. He's storming down a goat path into the trees, clutching a lyre with one snapped string, his sun crown wilting like a forgotten houseplant. Apparently, someone insulted his verse. The nerve. A mere mortal bard, a teenager probably, mocked Apollo's use of the word shimmereth, claimed it was stuffy, said it lacked soul. So now Apollo's leaving in a golden huff, dragging his daw, amaged instrument like a bad memory. You trail behind as he mutters to himself. They don't understand the cadence of cosmic light, he says. They wouldn't know strophe from antistrophe if it hit them like a solar flare. Which, frankly, it might. You duck beneath a branch. The air smells of time and impending retribution. Far off, cicadas launch a rhythm like ticking clocks. Apollo steps off the path and into an olive grove, one of those sun-dappled, sleepy corners of the world where nothing urgent ever happens. The kind of place where you could forget wars, or deadlines, or the fact that the sun is quite literally behind on its schedule because its driver is on strike. He drops onto a stone, tosses the lyre beside him, and sighs, a huge, echoing, god-sized sigh that sends a ripple through the trees. The broken lyre string vibrates once. Then again, Apollo glances at it, shrugs. He plucks another string, a whole one this time. It gives a soft, hollow note, nothing special. But then he hums, low, like wind through reeds, and without quite meaning to, he says, "The olive leans, huddy like shoulders tired of prophecy." He freezes. Did that just rhyme? Barely. But it felt like something new. Historians still argue whether that counts as the first line of poetry. You whisper to no one in particular. Then again, they also argue whether olive trees really whisper, "You're here." They definitely do. Now, to be fair, Apollo has been playing music for millennia. He's been praised and feared, worshipped and cursed, and often all at once. He's not new to beauty. But this half-spoken line, this emotional sneeze into the ether, it surprises even him. He repeats it, slower this time, like tasting honey you didn't know was in your tea. "The olive leans like shoulders tired of prophecy." Then he snorts. "Ugh, too moody." Still he keeps humming. You settle in on a patch of moss, careful not to disturb the ants, forming what looks suspiciously like an audience. This wasn't the plan, you know. Poetry was never supposed to be a thing. The gods dealt in declarations, decrees, and occasionally some funky interpretive dance. But this business of weaving meaning from sadness and bark sap, that's not divine protocol. A breeze kicks up, and the lyre gives another note on its own. Just a whisper. Apollo listens. Then almost shyly, even the wind stutters sometimes. That one's better. You almost feel bad he's alone to hear it. Well, except for you, the ants, and one goat perched on a nearby cliff, chewing grass with the intensity of a seasoned critic. The thing is, Apollo's tantrum isn't really about one kid with opinions. It's about the tension that's been building inside him. Being the god of everything brilliant is exhausting, and sometimes brilliance wants to cry into its pillow and write metaphors about tree sap. Fun fringe fact, some ancient sources claim Apollo once tried journaling. Supposedly, he etched feelings into the back of a turtle shell and accidentally invented string instruments when he added sinew to the shell out of boredom. So basically, your moody high school cousin with a ukulele was channeling a sun god. Back in the grove, Apollo tries a few more lines. Some are too formal, some are just weird. Icarus kissed the sky and left chapstick on the clouds. Yikes, that one's going on the cutting room floor. Still something's shifting. The cadence of the grove, the insects, the breeze, the soft creak of branches, they begin to fold into the rhythm of his muttering, like the world's tuning itself to him, or he's finally hearing it right. Then suddenly snap, another lyre string breaks. Apollo freezes, eyes wide. You brace for a thunderbolt or a sudden blaze of divine wrath. But instead, he laughs. Not a polite chuckle, not an ominous, "I shall smite thee" chortle. A real, exhausted, cathartic laugh. The kind you let out when you finally realize your worst day has accidentally birthed something you kind of like. "I guess that's a stanza," he murmurs. "Maybe it is." The goat sneezes dramatically. Apollo squints at it. "You're not wrong," he tells the goat. "It lacks structure." He stands, stretches, and looks around. There's no audience, no temple acolytes, no fanfare, just you, him, a broken lyre, and a line of olive trees with very strong opinions on meter. You know what's odd? In this moment, Apollo doesn't feel like a god. He feels like a person, sun-touched and aching, trying to say something real in a world that mostly listens to thunder. Maybe that's what poetry is, maybe that's how it started, and maybe, just maybe, he's not done. Apollo doesn't walk so much as glide through the olive grove now, his sandals barely brushing the dirt. Something has shifted in him. His shoulders hang a little lower, not with defeat, but with something like curiosity. And when a god gets curious, well, history tends to happen. The lyre, though wounded, dangles from his hand, occasionally strumming itself on passing leaves. You follow quietly, the cicadas still ticking their gentle percussion like a natural metronome. Somewhere ahead, you hear a strange humming. It's not melodic, not exactly, more like breathy tones and wordless notes drifting between trees. You tiptoe forward, again, he probably wouldn't vaporize you, but let's not test that theory, and spot something shimmering in the clearing. Nymphs, 3 of them, not the flashy type with golden gowns and dramatic poses. These are forest nymphs, probably cousins of moss and bark. Their hair is tangled with vines, their robes are damp with dew, they're swaying back and forth, eyes closed, and yes, they're humming. Each note seems to roll from their lips like fog over water. No words, just sound, texture, vibration. Apollo stops and watches, fascinated. He tilts his head like a dog hearing jazz for the first time. Then very softly he joins in. A single note, a bit higher, just enough to thread between theirs. The nymphs don't open their eyes, but their humming adjusts. Warmer now, more curious. Apollo closes his eyes. You blink. And somehow they're singing together now, despite never agreeing to it. It's like musical osmosis. Their sounds slide across each other, building layers, harmonies, and, strangely, emotions. Not emotions you name easily. Something like distant longing, or laughter inside a cave. You're not crying. There's just olive pollen in the air. Now here's the mainstream historical fact. In actual Greek tradition, music and poetry were deeply intertwined, performed with the lyre, often improvised, and almost always rooted in oral storytelling. What we call poetry today, back then it was half music, half magic, and 100% the coolest party trick at a symposium. Anyway, Apollo finishes his note. The nymphs fall silent. For a second, the clearing feels like the pause after a perfect chord, the one that makes you afraid to breathe in case you ruin it. Then one of them says, "Huh." Apollo blinks. "Huh?" "You rhyme weird," says another nymph, opening one sleepy eye. "Not bad, just like a pine cone thinking about its parents." Apollo considers this. That might be my new favorite compliment. You're welcome, the third says, plucking a beetle from her sleeve. You gonna sing more, sunshine boy? He opens his mouth, then pauses, because something's happening. His chest, his solar flare heart, starts to pulse in rhythm. Not to a beat, but to a pattern, a cadence. Words start forming in his mind, but they're not words he meant to say, they just appear, fully formed. Roots in slumber twist and sigh, leaves like whispers drift on high. I sang to silence, just to try, but silence hummed a lullaby. A long pause, the nymphs stare, even the beetle stares. That was, one begins. Kind of pretty, the second admits. Way too many S sounds, the third shrugs. But nice. Apollo looks startled. I didn't think about it, it just happened. And that's the thing, isn't it? True creativity doesn't always feel like construction, it feels like discovery. Like you tripped over a thought someone buried under your ribs. Fringe tidbit time. Ancient rumours claimed nymphs invented breath music, a form of early trance singing used to charm trees into blooming early. Totally unverified, but standing here, listening to these three hum critics, you start to believe it might be true. Apollo tries again, fingers brushing his broken lyre, and says, drip by drip the sap confesses all the secrets bark suppresses. That one slaps, a nymph says immediately. Historians still argue whether slaps was ever acceptable nymph vocabulary, you murmur to yourself. But here we are, they start swaying again. One nymph taps her toe, accidentally inventing the first beatbox rhythm using only pine needles. Apollo grins, actually grins, and joins in, this time not with sound, but with storytelling. Once there was a tree so wise, she knew the names of passing flies. They told her stories as they flew, of storm-kissed oceans, skies so blue. He trails off. You glance at him. He's sweating, but not from heat. Poetry, real poetry, costs something. Even for a god. The nymphs don't say anything. But one walks up, pulls a single vine from her tangled hair, and ties it gently around Apollo's wrist. For rhythm, she whispers. He nods, visibly moved. Thank you. The grove is quiet now, not silent, just full of rest. You feel it in your lungs, in the corners of your mind that usually race around trying to solve everything. This grove, this rhythm, this poetry, it slows them down. Apollo starts walking again, leaving the nymphs behind with a murmur of gratitude. You follow, the vine bouncing at his wrist like a tempo. He's not sure where he's going, but he's humming again. And something tells you the next metaphor is just around the bend. The grove begins to thin, letting in streaks of honeyed light that fall in angled beams between the trees. Apollo walks quietly now, his sandals brushing against dry grass and fallen twigs. Every so often he murmurs something under his breath. Half a phrase, a rhythm, maybe just the shape of a thought trying to become language. You're not sure how far you've walked. The world feels soft around the edges, like it's nodding off with you. And then you hear it, a strange, dripping sound, slow and steady, like a leaky faucet in a very ancient, very poetic plumbing system. You glance toward the sound and find it, sap, thick and golden, bleeding from a gnarled old tree. It oozes slowly, like it's thinking through each drop. Apollo stops, tilts his head, and steps closer. The tree is old, older than Delphi, maybe older than gods. Its bark curls like sunburnt scrolls. The sap glistens in the afternoon light, casting tiny rainbows on Apollo's fingertips as he reaches out. And then softly, even trees cannot hide when they're wounded. He says it like it surprised him, like the tree whispered it first. That's the moment when he realizes what's happening. Poetry, whatever it is, isn't just from him. It's around him, in things, in trees, in goats. We'll get there again, don't worry. In everything that waits long enough to feel something. You sit beside a knotted root, watching him crouch near the bark. Why does it feel like heartbreak? he mutters, more to the tree than to you, and then sap drips down, like things unsaid, staining wood where dreams have bled. A pause. Too dramatic? He asks no one. Absolutely. But isn't that the point? Mainstream historical fact. Sap was sometimes used in ancient ink mixtures, especially in Egypt and the Levant. There's a strong chance early poetry was literally written in tree tears. Romantic or disturbing? You decide. Apollo touches the sap to his lips, curious. Tastes like childhood and regret, he mumbles. A beetle scurries past. He watches it, intrigued. Then, with a slight grin, you carry leaves like armor plates marching past old dinner dates? Poetic? Sort of dumb, definitely, but charming. He flops down onto the grass like a teenager who just discovered spoken word night, and then he does the thing no god is supposed to do. He sighs again. A real sigh. A tired, why am I the deity of this much stuff? Sigh. Mortals don't know how lucky they are, he says aloud. They get to feel things without having to represent them. You raise an eyebrow, but he's not looking. Gods, he continues, are supposed to radiate, lead, dominate, inspire. He says inspire like it tastes weird in his mouth now. But when I talk about feelings, he adds, everyone gets uncomfortable. Fringe tidbit time. There's a lesser-known myth, possibly invented by bored Athenians with too much wine, about a tree nymph who challenged Apollo to a grief-off. She supposedly won after reciting a 22-minute lament about moss abandonment. Absolutely no hard evidence, but she shows up in one 4th century doodle looking smug. Back in the clearing, Apollo lies down, arms behind his head, and stares at the sky. I think I need a metaphor detox. You lie beside him. The clouds above are lazily stretching across the sky like tired ghosts. Clouds drift like regrets. Too lazy to apologize. He winces. That was terrible. You nod. Still better than the bark metaphor. Don't come for my bark metaphor, he mutters. A breeze passes. The tree groans slightly. Apollo raises an eyebrow. See, even the tree thinks you're rude. Then silence, and then the goat returns. Yes, that goat, the cliffside creature from earlier, now clambering into the edge of the clearing with a mouthful of what might be someone's laundry. It stares at Apollo. Apollo stares back. You sense a strange connection forming. Apollo leans forward. What's your opinion on enjambment? The goat sneezes. Fair, Apollo replies. He sits back and thinks. I need structure, he decides. These lines, they wander. They're just emotional guesses. If I'm going to do this poetry thing, it needs rules. You can almost hear the heavens tremble. A god wants boundaries. Alert the cosmic irony department. But here's the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek poetry started freeform, just spoken ideas set to a rhythm, or whether it was always structured from the beginning. There's evidence for both, but in this grove it's clear. Poetry began by accident, from boredom, from heartbreak, from goats. Apollo takes a stick and begins drawing shapes in the dirt. A line of 4 beats, he murmurs, then 3, then 5. He hums. You recognize the pattern. It's not just structure, it's control. Maybe for the first time, Apollo is using poetry to contain his god-sized emotions. I am not thunder, I'm raindrops in sequence. I'm trying not to flood. He looks up at you. What do you think? You nod. The goat belches. And that's a yes, Apollo says. He smiles. Not the blinding god smile, just a small, satisfied one. And as he sits under that sap-bleeding tree, dirt drawing like a kid lost in doodles, you realize something. This moment, this tiny, sleepy moment, might be the actual beginning of poetry. Not the grand myths, not the epics. Just a god, a goat, and a tree leaking metaphors. You lean back into the grass. The breeze hushes the world. Apollo keeps scribbling. And the sun, which has been waiting patiently overhead, finally begins to move again. The sun resumes its slow crawl across the sky, and for a while, you and Apollo sit in comfortable silence. It's the kind of silence that feels rare in mythology. No oracles screeching, no monsters shrieking, just the wind combing the tall grass and the occasional belch from a goat with gastrointestinal opinions. Apollo twirls the stick in his hand, his divine fingers now smudged with soil. You can almost hear the gears turning behind his eyes, divine and golden as they are. He's not just scribbling now, he's listening, because the world, it turns out, has been whispering verse at him this whole time. A small stone rolls down a nearby slope, clinking against another like an accidental drumbeat. A cicada stops mid-buzz, and you both glance up like, was that the bridge to a chorus? Then Apollo mutters. Even silence tries to rhyme, if you leave it long enough. He says it casually, as if he hadn't just voiced the entire philosophy of poetry in one sleepy line. You don't clap, you wouldn't dare. But the goat sort of kicks its back leg in approval, and that's good enough for Apollo. You continue together down a narrow footpath. There's no rush. The god of the sun has decided time can wait, which explains why it now feels like afternoon has been stretching out for centuries. The light is syrupy and golden, and just starting to fray at the edges. Then you hear it, laughter. Not booming, not sinister, just a snort, then a chuckle, followed by a suspiciously musical ha. You and Apollo glance at each other. He raises a golden eyebrow. Satyrs! You follow the sound around a bend and find exactly what you expect. 4 satyrs in a semicircle, lounging like they're on their 15th coffee break. One has a tiny pan flute. Another is playing with a reed like it's a straw. The third is asleep. The fourth is looking at Apollo with very obvious amusement. Nice stick poem, sunshine, he says, pointing at the dirt on Apollo's tunic. What's next? Crying into olive oil? Apollo, for once, doesn't retaliate. He just grins. Maybe. Got a better idea? Oh, we always have ideas, says the pan flute satyr. They're usually bad. But fun, says another. We heard your little tree lament, says the one playing with the reed. Sap and heartbreak, deep stuff. You liked it? Apollo asks, visibly startled. Liked it? The satyr laughs. Yeah, we critiqued it. A short pause. You critiqued it? Oh yeah, says another. We gave it a solid 7 out of 10. Lost points for rhyme redundancy. Apollo tilts his head. Which rhyme? Sigh and high, says the flute one. Predictable. Apollo opens his mouth to protest, but stops. Because they're right? I didn't think I'd ever say this, he murmurs. But can I have your feedback? And that's how Apollo, god of plague and light and cosmic justice, finds himself workshopping verses with 4 half-drunk goatmen who once invented fart limericks for fun. They start clapping out rhythms. One slaps a tree trunk, another smacks his thigh. The sleepy one wakes up long enough to say pentameter, before passing out again. Apollo listens, then joins. His voice glides over their chaotic music, bringing order without killing the chaos. Leaves are not lost, they dance, to a wind that forgot its name. Oh, they all say at once. That's nice, one whispers. Kinda sad, kinda floaty. But not too floaty, another adds, like it's floaty with boots on. Apollo laughs. That's exactly what I was going for. Historians still argue whether this moment qualifies as the first poetry workshop, you whisper to yourself, or the first critique circle, or the first time a god accepted constructive feedback without turning anyone into a daisy. A fringe tidbit for you. Some ancient fragments suggest satyrs weren't just wine-loving chaos machines. They may have been involved in early dithyrambic performances, a wild musical precursor to Greek tragedy. So yeah, those wine-sloshing party animals might have been the first drama nerds. One satyr leans close. You know what your poems need? Apollo looks intrigued. Tell me. Lunch. And that's how you end up at an impromptu picnic made entirely of things Apollo did not pack. Wild grapes, stolen bread, and a wheel of cheese that is definitely at war with itself. The satyrs eat. Apollo chews thoughtfully, watching the clouds tumble past. Then he says, not to anyone in particular, bread gets all. 'Tis stale. So do memories. There's a long pause. One satyr wipes his mouth. That's actually kind of perfect. Yeah, says another. I feel seen. You sit back and let the moment sink in. The wind hums low through the grass. The laughter fades. One satyr starts snoring in rhythm. It's a weird, peaceful beat. Apollo plucks his lyre, not to play, but to listen to the echo of a single note vibrating through his palm. You watch him close his eyes, and then he says, "Maybe the point of poetry is not to be understood, just to be heard." You don't answer, neither do the satyrs, but all of you feel it, like the grass listening, like the sky holding its breath, like a sentence waiting patiently for its last word. After the satyrs drift off, two curled around a half-eaten cheese wheel and one, inexplicably asleep halfway up a tree, you and Apollo continue walking. He's barefoot now, sandals looped over his shoulder like a mortal on a lazy beach day. The lyre hangs at his side, swinging slightly with each step. He hums under his breath, not a tune, exactly, more like a syllabic rhythm. 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause. His eyes flick to the sky occasionally, as if he's listening for a reply that never quite arrives. The path narrows, then widens into a cliffside overlook. A warm breeze sweeps in, rustling Apollo's tunic and sending little dust devils skittering along the stone. And there, on the far edge, balanced like it's auditioning for a dramatic role in a tragedy, stands a goat. Yep, that same goat. The one with an unsolicited opinion on enjambment. The goat chews a leaf slowly and gives Apollo a look that says, "I am both unimpressed and deeply moved." Apollo nods, solemn. "You again?" The goat sneezes. Apollo sighs. "Very well, let's try something new." He steps forward, gazing out over the vast, lazy landscape below, fields quilted in olive trees, small villages curling smoke into the air, and, far in the distance, a glint of sea. Then he raises the lyre and plucks a single string. It's shaky, tentative, but intentional. And suddenly something clicks. You stand alone, proud on a ledge, like fate itself forgot your edge. A single hoof, a single breath, so close to life, so near to death. The goat flicks its tail. Apollo turns to you. That one was for him. You raise a brow. The goat? He's got presence. And honestly, he does. The wind ruffles his scraggly fur in a way that's somehow heroic. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek shepherds believed goats were sacred animals, symbols of fertility, yes, but also chaos and instinct. Some believed they could see spirits, others just liked their cheese. The point is, goats were woven into the daily and the divine. Apollo plucks another string and speaks again, more to himself. I never meant to write for goats, but sometimes they're the only ones listening. And that's when something odd happens. The wind shifts. The grass below shivers, even the lyre hums faintly, though Apollo's hands are still, and a single olive leaf caught in the air drifts upward, not down, curling around Apollo's wrist before spiraling off into the sky. He watches it. So do you. Then he whispers, "Nature doesn't care for applause, but she listens." And that's the thing, isn't it? The most profound poems are rarely recited on stages. They're muttered on cliffsides, whispered in groves, hummed into the bones of trees. They don't ask to be remembered. They ask to be felt. Apollo lowers the lyre. "I need a new string," he says softly. You glance at the cliff. "You're not thinking of using goat hair?" The goat narrows its eyes. Apollo considers. Tempting. But instead he sits cross-legged and pulls a thin reed from the side of the path. He rubs it between his fingers, listens to the vibration, then ties it gently to the lyre's neck. It's a poor substitute for divine gut string, but it hums. He plucks it. The note is soft, imperfect, but real. Not all music needs to shine. Some just wants to speak. He hums again, and this time the rhythm builds. 3 notes, pause, 2 notes, pause. Then a sudden burst of 6, like footsteps rushing uphill. The goat stamps its hoof once, in time, and in that rhythm, goat-assisted and reed-strung, poetry becomes something else, not just words, not just rhyme. Performance? Open scholarly debate? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether Greek poetry was born as solo monologue, or if it emerged fully tied to movement and gesture, chant, rhythm, even dance. But right now, watching Apollo gently tap his fingers to match the goat's hoofbeats, you're pretty sure poetry didn't arrive quietly. It stomped, strutted, and maybe even sneezed its way into being. Apollo stops suddenly. The breeze halts with him. He leans forward and says, "We measure gods in golden lines, but even goats can shape the rhymes." Then he winks at you, and for a moment, you forget he's a god. He just looks like someone trying to say something true in a language he hasn't quite mastered yet. You sit beside him as the light begins to change. It's still afternoon somehow, but it's becoming sleepy. Longer shadows, softer colors. The kind of light that makes even myths look like memories. The goat settles down, legs tucked under, blinking slowly. Apollo plucks his new reed string one last time, letting the note drift off the cliffside and tumble into the wind. And far below, in a village no one's named yet, a child stirs in her sleep, dreaming of rhythms she doesn't understand. Not yet, but soon. The wind is quieter now, not gone, just softened, like it's resting its elbows on the cliffs, listening. Apollo stands slowly, brushing dried grass from his tunic. The lyre rests at his side, that new reed string still humming with the ghost of the last note. You rise too, stretching slightly, and glance down the slope ahead. The path leads toward thicker woods, deeper shadows, fewer goats. "Time to see how far this language thing goes," he murmurs, already stepping forward. The walk is long and winding. Apollo seems preoccupied. He's muttering phrases under his breath, trying them out like shoes that almost fit. The wind forgot its destination. Rain walks backwards on stone. Even silence wears a mask. He frowns. Ugh, too dramatic again. You pass between gnarled trees as the light dims to a quiet bronze. Leaves overhead form a soft canopy. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint sound of water, a creek maybe, or a lazy river trying to remember where it's going. Then, quite suddenly, you hear voices. Many voices, singing, in harmony. Apollo stops, his brow lifts. That's not bad. You creep forward together and peek through a veil of hanging vines into a glade, and there, lounging beneath a fig tree, are 9 women. You know who they are before anyone speaks. The Muses, daughters of Zeus, goddesses of art, memory, dance, song, and whatever else mortals can't shut up about. They're radiant in that effortless way some people wake up, looking perfect. And they are definitely mid-lunch. Grapes, honey, flatbread. A pitcher of wine halfway empty. One muse is balancing a fig on her nose, another is humming with her mouth full. Apollo clears his throat. They all look up at once. "Oh," says Calliope, brushing crumbs off her lap. "You." "Me," Apollo replies, attempting a humble smile. Urania leans over to Melpomene and mutters, "Let's see what the solar drama king wants now." Terpsichore chuckles. "Maybe another love ballad about his chariot." Apollo bows slightly. "Actually, I came for feedback." That stops them. They exchange glances. Thalia raises a brow. "Feedback? From us? On your, suntans?" says Euterpe. "No," Apollo says, lowering the lyre. "On something I've been working on. Something spoken." They all fall very quiet. He clears his throat again and speaks. A reed string hums in wind's disguise, like stories told by blinking skies. He waits. The muses stare. Polyhymnia, always the most dramatic, slowly leans back and says, "Oh gods, he's gotten soft." "You've gotten good," Clio corrects. Erato claps once. "Was that a metaphor in line 2? Look at you." "Did you just use enjambment?" Calliope asks, mouth slightly open. Apollo shrugs, trying not to smile. "Maybe." The muses descend, and by descend, we mean they mob him like theatre critics who've just discovered a new playwright with cheekbones. They poke at his lyre, test his reed string, argue over syllable counts, and debate whether he's allowed to use star metaphors if he hasn't actually visited every star. Clio waves a breadstick. You can't just say blinking skies. Some of us do historical accuracy for a living. But it sounded nice, Apollo protests. Sound isn't everything, Urania chimes in. Sometimes it is, Erato whispers, already scribbling something down on her fig-leaf napkin. Then comes the big one. Calliope stands up. She's the muse of epic poetry, and when she talks, even nymphs stop dancing mid-spin. Let me hear it again, she says. Apollo repeats the verse, this time slower. A reed string hums in wind's disguise, like stories told by blinking skies. Calliope closes her eyes, nods. That's not bad. Apollo exhales like someone who just got a gold star from his strictest teacher. But, she continues, you're missing something. He frowns. What? She opens her eyes. Structure, identity. Anyone can spout pretty lines. What makes it a poem is how it breathes. He looks confused. She clarifies. It needs intention, shape. Rhythm that isn't just rhythm, it's voice. Otherwise it's just lyrical muttering. Apollo sits. The Muses gather, a circle forms, wine is poured, bread is passed. And just like that, the world's first informal poetry workshop goes fully academic. Here's your mainstream historical nugget. The Muses were originally invoked at the start of nearly every major epic. Poets would literally beg them to provide inspiration, as if poetry weren't an art, but a kind of divine possession, which, judging by what's happening here, might be true. Apollo begins testing lines. The Muses interrupt. That one's too breathy. Too many sibilants. Don't use the word moist, ever. But that last one, Calliope says, pointing, that was close. They workshop it for what feels like hours. The creek hums nearby, a few frogs add ambient croaking. One muse tries to harmonize with a passing bird and then gets into an argument with it. Bird wins. Eventually, Apollo says, I don't know why this matters so much. I'm already the god of music. Thalia looks at him, softening. Maybe because this isn't music? Not really. It's thought, Melpomene says. It's you, Erato adds. Unarmed. That silences him. You watch his jaw tighten, not from anger, but realization. Music, prophecy, archery, they all let him perform. But this poetry thing, it asks him to reveal. And that's scarier than snakes or monsters, or even Zeus. Open scholarly debate. Some researchers suggest the earliest Greek poets were viewed more like priests, vessels channeling truth, not creators of it. Others say that's romanticized nonsense. But Apollo, he's somewhere in between now, still divine, but freshly human. The Muses drift off one by one, slipping into the forest with bellies full and notes scribbled in fig ink. Before she leaves, Calliope turns and says, Write something real, golden boy. We're listening. Apollo sits alone with his lyre. You sit with him. And as the stars begin to show faintly above the fig leaves, you realize the god of light has started chasing shadows. The fig leaves rustle faintly behind you as the last of the Muses disappears into the trees. Their laughter fades like a distant song you can't quite hum anymore, still echoing, but just out of reach. Apollo sits very still, his lyre across his knees, fingers resting lightly on the strings. He hasn't spoken since Calliope's parting words. Write something real, golden boy. Real. That word seems to weigh more than the lyre itself. You wait in silence with him. The moon hasn't risen yet, but the stars are arriving, shy and scattered, like they're unsure whether this quiet evening deserves their full glow. Overhead, a single bat flutters past, muttering complaints to itself in high-pitched clicks. Probably a literary critic. Finally, Apollo exhales. I hate when they're right. You nod. He strums a single note, low and soft. The reed string gives a little shiver, as if unsure it wants to be involved in this much vulnerability. Still it sings. Apollo plucks again, this time finding a slow rhythm. Not complex, not divine. Just steady, like a heartbeat trying to apologize. Then he speaks. I knew a man who feared the stars, not for their light, but for their scars. He'd count them nightly, one by one, 1,000 wounds from battles won. He stops, listens. Somewhere, a cricket adjusts its tempo to match. Apollo's voice is softer now, almost embarrassed. I gave him firewood to warm his tent. He used it all for argument. Said light was loud or too bright to dream. He missed the dark more than it seemed. He trails off. You say nothing. The breeze dares not breathe. Then he mumbles, "Too much?" "No," you whisper. That felt like something. And it did. The words didn't shine. They didn't command. They lingered. They asked for permission to sit with you a while. Historians still argue whether this is the moment Apollo truly understood poetry. You murmur in your head, not just as sound or prophecy, but as confession. He looks up. I think I need to find somewhere quieter. You blink. This isn't quiet. I need solitude, that sacred kind of quiet, the kind where your thoughts stop performing and just start leaking out. He stands, tucks the lyre under his arm, and starts down a narrow slope you didn't notice before. You follow, branches brushing your shoulders, moonlight flickering now in silvery stripes. Each footstep sounds like a question you're not sure you're ready to answer. Eventually, the trees part, revealing a shallow cave, more like a hollow in the hillside, moss-draped and echo-soft. Apollo steps inside and sits cross-legged near the back wall. You join him, the air inside cool and slightly damp. And on the walls, not carvings, paintings, simple, childlike. Earth-toned figures with stick limbs and sunbursts for heads. A hunter with a bow, a woman with a lyre, a goat, possibly drunk. Cave art, ancient graffiti from someone long forgotten. Apollo touches the rock, gently. They were trying to tell stories, he says, with what they had, mud, blood, bark charcoal. You nod. He tilts his head. So what if poetry started here, not in temples, not on scrolls, but in little damp hollows where no one's watching? You both stare at the wall. The cave holds breath from years ago, a whisper left in charcoal flow. He whispers it so quietly it doesn't even feel like a poem, just a thought with rhythm. Fringe tidbit, there's an obscure theory that ancient Greeks may have preserved early poetry using visual rhyme cues, matching symbols in cave drawings that hinted at repeated sounds. No hard evidence, but standing here, it feels true. Apollo picks up a piece of dark stone and starts sketching, not words, just shapes, arches, lines, maybe a river, maybe a fire. I don't want this to disappear, he says softly. Not because it's great, just because it's mine. He pauses, then adds, that's the real danger with gods, you know? Everyone remembers our deeds. No one remembers our thoughts. That hits harder than you expect. He continues sketching until the wall looks like a sleepy dream, a rambling, wordless poem scrawled in ash and longing. Then he sits back, looks at you, and says, I think I just invented journaling. You nod. Welcome to the club. The cave is utterly still. Outside, the moon has risen at last, casting soft silver across the hillside. You both watch it from the cave mouth, Apollo hugging his knees like someone who just read a sad story and hasn't decided how to process it yet. Then, almost reluctantly, he says, I was made for light, but I think I miss the dark sometimes. And that's it. That's the whole poem. Not flashy, not perfect, but real. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly what the Muses asked for. The cave behind you glows faintly now, not from torches or magic, but from memory. Apollo sits quietly in its mouth, knees hugged to his chest, watching the moon travel across the sky like a word he's still trying to pronounce. The stars have multiplied, thousands of them scattered like silver punctuation across a velvet sky. You feel the air cool. Crickets resume their sleepy symphony, insects speak in code, leaves in sighs, and Apollo, he just breathes. I think I get it now, he says. You glance over. This whole poetry thing. He's not smiling, he's glowing. Not in the dramatic God of the Sun way, but like someone who's finally cracked the code to their own silence. Poetry is when you're too tired to shout, but too full to stay quiet. You nod. That feels about right. Then he adds, almost sheepishly, also, I wrote a poem about a cracked amphora. Of course he did. You raise an eyebrow. A love poem? Worse, he says. Existential dread poem. He pulls out a folded scrap of parchment, who knows where he got it, and clears his throat like a teenager at open mic night. Wine dripped from my side, not spilled, but surrendered. The floor didn't thank me, it just got wet. A pause. That's bleak, you say gently. Apollo nods. Right? That amphora had issues. Here's your mainstream historical drop. Amphora, those tall, two-handled clay vessels, were everyday items in ancient Greece. But once broken, they were often repurposed for writing practice, literal vessels of leftover thoughts. So Apollo, composing his first big poem on one, historically ironic, emotionally tragic, and kind of perfect. He continues, they say I was meant for nectar, but I cracked before the toast. Now I just hold ants. You try not to laugh. That last line slaps. He beams. Thank you. I felt very ant-adjacent when I wrote it. Then he lies back in the grass outside the cave, staring upward. A few clouds drift across the stars now. They move lazily, like they don't want to disturb the view. Apollo watches them the way poets do, like they're metaphors pretending to be weather. He says softly, the sky's just a jar that doesn't break. It holds too much and still asks for more. He looks at you. Is it bad if I want to write poems for things that don't exist? No, you whisper. That's maybe the best reason to write. He thinks on that. Then something strange happens. The amphora from his story. It's sitting nearby, cracked, just as described, a jagged line down its belly, a tiny trail of ants actually weaving in and out of its base, and inside, a little splash of leftover wine catching starlight. You point to it. He groans. Of course, the universe is mocking me. Or maybe it's listening. He picks up the amphora, gently, like it's a child that woke from a bad dream. Want to try something? He asks. You nod. He places the amphora down on the ground, taps it once. It echoes, a low clay soul kind of sound. Then he speaks into it. I forgive you. And for a moment, the amphora glows. Just a flicker, just a pulse. But it does, because maybe when gods speak softly into broken things, the universe listens. Fringe tidbit. A minor cult near Epidaurus once claimed that broken household items could become divine vessels if addressed in rhyme during the full moon. Totally unverifiable. But you'll sit. He's sitting here watching a pot blush with starlight. So, maybe not that far-fetched. Apollo sets it down and sighs. I think I'm addicted. To poetry? He nods, mock grim. It's a problem. I saw a snail earlier and immediately wanted to write a haiku. Do it, you whisper. He pauses, thinks, then, snail on olive root, carrying rain in silence. Who told you to go? You stare at him. Okay, you admit. That was unreasonably beautiful. He shrugs. I'm in a phase. And here's the open scholarly debate. Scholars still argue whether early Greek poets like Homer actually composed in written form or developed their work orally with spontaneous recitation, sometimes adapting on the spot based on rhythm, audience, or amphora moods. If that's the case, Apollo's freestyle snail haiku might be closer to ancient tradition than anything found in a library. A breeze rolls in, brushing your arms with the chill of pre-dawn. The stars dim slightly, not fading, just softening. You look at Apollo. He looks back. Then without theatrics, he says, You know what scares me? I might not be the best at this, and I think I like it. You nod slowly. There's a comfort in not being perfect, in trying, in being seen trying. And for a god who's supposed to know everything, that's a poem in itself. The amphora hums once more in the grass. The ants retreat. And the sky begins just barely to lighten. The sky hasn't turned pink yet, but it's thinking about it. There's that deep indigo smear across the east, where the stars begin to vanish one by one, like reluctant guests at the end of a party. Apollo watches this process with the air of someone who should probably get back to work, considering the whole sun god job. But he doesn't move. Not yet. His fingers trace slow patterns across the amphora's cracked surface, and you can tell his mind is still stuck on rhyme schemes, metaphors, and possibly snails. Then a hiccup. Not from Apollo, from the air. You feel it before you hear it, a shift, a sparkle, like the universe just cleared its throat. And then, with a theatrical pop and the faint scent of overripe figs, Dionysus drops into the grass beside you. Literally. He tumbles out of nowhere in a tangle of purple robes and vine-wrapped ankles, clutching a jug of wine in one hand and a cluster of grapes in the other. "Miss me?" he slurs. Apollo groans. "No!" Dionysus sits up, squinting like he's trying to remember what decade it is. His curls are full of twigs. His eyes are bloodshot but suspiciously insightful. "You've been writing?" he says, pointing an accusatory grape at Apollo. "Yes," Apollo says, as if caught shoplifting feelings. Dionysus grins. "I felt it. You've got the scent of someone who just wrote a sestina about tree sap." "That's oddly specific." "I dated a muse once," Dionysus replies, plucking a grape and popping it into his mouth. "Didn't end well. She said I was too interpretive." "You don't ask what that means. You're not sure you want to know." Dionysus crawls over to the amphora, sniffs it, then raises his eyebrows. "You poured wine in this?" Apollo shrugs. "It was already leaking metaphors." Dionysus sighs dramatically. "You poets, so moody." But then he looks at Apollo with something approaching admiration. "I read some of your lines," he says casually, as if divine eavesdropping is no big deal. "That cracked amphora one? Very bone-deep despair. I liked it." Apollo blinks. "Oh, you did?" Dionysus nods. "Especially the ant part, symbolic, sort of bleak, sort of crunchy. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Dionysus, though known as the god of wine and parties, was also deeply tied to Greek theatre and poetic form. The earliest tragedies were performed in his honor. So when he critiques poetry, he actually knows what he's talking about, even if he's 3 sips away from calling a tree Greg and asking it to prom." He flops back in the grass, arms spread. "So," he says, "are we writing now? Are we poets now? Should I grow a beard and stare at olives until I cry?" Apollo rolls his eyes. "You have a beard. Then I'm halfway there." Dionysus sits up again and narrows his eyes. "Let me hear something." Apollo hesitates. Dionysus pouts. "Come on, I crashed this meadow for a reason." So Apollo sighs, shifts the lyre on his lap, and recites, "I sang to darkness hoping for light, but silence echoed back polite. A goat once listened more than most, and goats, I find, don't often boast." Dionysus stares, then claps slowly like someone sealing a sacred pact. "That's hilarious," he says, "and also kind of beautiful. I'm not crying. You're crying." "You're drunk," Apollo mutters. "Which enhances my interpretive faculties," Dionysus replies proudly. You smile. This is not how you pictured Greek god poetry hour going. "But it works." Dionysus tosses a grape at you. "What about our silent friend here? Got any verses?" You shake your head. "Tragic," he says. "Everyone's a critic until the lyre lands in their lap." He stands and starts pacing in erratic zigzags. "You know what your poems are missing?" he says, waving his jug. Apollo narrows his eyes. "Don't say wine." "No, well, yes, but also grit, emotion, the stuff that gets stuck in your teeth after you've confessed your worst idea to someone you thought was asleep." He suddenly stops, grabs the amphora, and says, "I spilled myself and across the floor, not to share, you are, but to escape. You licked the drops like wine. I hoped you'd taste regret." A pause. Then Dionysus laughs. "Too much?" Apollo stares. "That was disturbingly good." "I know," Dionysus grins. "I have layers, like a mythological onion." Fringe tidbit. Some fringe scholars believe early Dionysian cults used poetic rituals involving confession, wine, and singing into pots as part of their rites, totally unverified. Possibly drunken gossip. But watching Dionysus whisper verse into cracked pottery, it feels real. The sun is beginning to stir below the horizon now. A sliver of warm light sneaks across the sky, brushing gold onto the tips of the trees. Apollo sees it and sighs. Time to work. You are the sun, Dionysus nods. Go make everything overly dramatic and shadowy. Apollo stands, stretches, and turns to you. His face is calmer now, not because he's figured everything out, but because he's stopped trying to. He lifts the lyre, plucks a chord, and the note that follows is sleepy and perfect. Not radiant, not godly, just honest. He looks back over his shoulder. Let's do this again sometime, he says softly. And then he walks into the sunrise, carrying poetry in one hand and yesterday's silence in the other. The sun stretches slowly across the sky like a cat waking up in the warmest spot of the room. Its light rolls over the hills, spills into the trees, and finally kisses the mouth of the little cave you and Dionysus still occupy. Apollo's already gone, risen into his golden commute, probably humming in iambic pentameter. But his absence lingers like the last chord of a song that doesn't quite want to end. Dionysus sits beside you, hair tangled and crown slightly askew. He's balancing his wine jug on his knee like a fussy bird. You know, he says, we should do something with this. With what, you ask? He spreads his arms theatrically. This, the poetry, the rhythm, the cracked pots and wounded tree metaphors, it's a movement. You blink. You mean, like, start a cult? No, those are so last century, he grins. I mean a chorus, a show, something mortal adjacent but God-tinged, very avant-garde. You realize something important in this moment. Dionysus is about to invent theatre. He stands abruptly, spilling only a little wine, and begins pacing. Picture it, a stage, some masks, one guy yelling about goats, while another guy screams about destiny. That's already how you live, you note. Exactly, he beams, which means it's relatable. He stops pacing and stares into the middle distance. But we need a hook, something catchy. What if... He squints dramatically. What if the poems become the performance? He waits, expecting applause. When you don't immediately cheer, he sighs. Tough crowd. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Greek chorus, the cornerstone of ancient theatre, did originate from Dionysian festivals. Early forms of tragedy began with choral hymns sung in honor of Dionysus, evolving over time into dramatic dialogues and stagecraft. So yes, technically, theatre was born from poetry, parties, and a little too much grape juice. Dionysus claps his hands once. I need a lyricist. You glance toward the rising sun. Apollo's busy. Dionysus smirks. Exactly, and that's why it'll work. And just like that, he begins writing, but not on parchment. No, Dionysus writes by stomping. He taps his heel on the ground, claps his hands, shouts a line into the wind, and then rewrites it mid-spin. One of the trees joins in by dropping a perfectly timed acorn. A bird tweets a counter-melody. He yells, "Love is just wine, we forgot to cork. Desire is a goat with a flair for drama." He stops. Too much? No, you say. Too. You. He beams. And here's the thing about Dionysus. His chaos has structure. Underneath the loose robe and wild eyes, he understands performance in a way Apollo never could. Apollo wants meaning to last. Dionysus wants it to land, loud, messy, memorable. He turns to you suddenly. You've been watching all this, you've felt it. So tell me, what's missing? You hesitate, then, maybe, a beginning? Dionysus frowns. A beginning, you say again. People need something to enter through, a doorway into the chaos. He nods, slowly. An opening verse. He picks up a stick and writes it in the dirt. We start with silence, then footsteps, then breath, and finally, a voice. You stare at it. It's Good. He doesn't wait for compliments. Okay, now we need a mask maker, a goat wrangler, and something that smells like smoke and regret. You blink. Why the goat wrangler? You'll see. Fringe tidbit. One of the theories behind the word tragedy, tragoidia in Greek, is that it originally meant goat song. Some say goats were the prize for the best plays. Others believe the chorus wore goat costumes, and some suspect it's just because goats are hilarious and sad at the same time, like poetry with hooves. Dionysus pulls out a sheet of rough parchment and scrawls a title at the top, The Ode of Things We Broke. You glance at him. Are you planning to perform this? No, he says. I'm planning to make mortals perform it. I'll cast some fishermen and a guy who once shouted at a cloud, very emotional. You sit back, letting his ideas tumble around you like vines wrapping around a tree. And then you ask the obvious question. What will it mean? Dionysus shrugs. Probably nothing. Maybe everything. That's the trick, isn't it? He taps the side of his head. Poetry tells you what it feels like. Theatre tells you what it looks like. He grins again. And wine? Wine makes you think both are your idea. You laugh. And it's in that moment, somewhere between sunrise and the smell of olives warming in the light, that you realize something profound. Apollo made poetry internal. Dionysus made it external. One wrote to understand himself, the other to be understood by others. And somewhere in the chaos of both lies what we now call art. Dionysus uncaps his jug, offers it to you. For the Muses, he says, raising a toast, and the messy middle bit. You tap your hand gently to the clay. You don't drink, but the gesture's enough. The light grows brighter. The cave behind you fades into morning, and the cracked amphora, still resting in the grass, hums a little tune all its own. One note shy of a melody, but full of feeling. By midday, the meadow is bathed in golden heat. Cicadas chirp with the lazy confidence of percussionists who know they're not being watched. Dionysus has fallen asleep in the shade of a fig tree, clutching his jug like it's a baby goat. You're left alone with birdsong, rustling leaves, and the faint aftertaste of metaphors in the air. You stretch, stand, brush the grass from your clothes. It's quiet now, peaceful. And then, like a perfectly timed drumbeat from the universe, plip. A single drop of something lands on your arm. You look up, no clouds, no birds, just a faint shimmer in the air. Above you, plip. Another drop, then a few more, and from the trees ahead, like a myth wandering in late to its own story, comes Echo. Yes, that Echo. She steps into the clearing like she's always been there, barefoot, olive-skinned, her robe the colour of faded dreams. Her hair is tangled with tiny bells that don't ring. Her eyes, fogged mirrors, not blank, just, distant. She doesn't say hello, she just opens her mouth and repeats, plip, plip. And just like that, the air feels charged again. Apollo returns. You don't see him arrive, you just feel it. A hush falls across the meadow, like nature tensing in anticipation of an entrance cue. He steps through the trees, looking fresher, sharper, more composed than you last saw him, which is impressive, considering he spent the morning dragging the sun up a hill. He sees Echo, stops short, then very quietly, "Oh." Echo turns her head slowly, repeats, "Oh." They stare at each other, not with tension exactly, more like shared history and regret and poetry that never quite got finished. "I wasn't expecting you," Apollo says. Echo tilts her head. "I wasn't expecting you," she repeats. But it's not mocking. It's thoughtful, soft. Apollo sighs. "Still only able to say what you've heard?" She nods. Or maybe she shrugs. Hard to tell. Fringe, tidbit time. According to one lesser-known version of her myth, Echo didn't just lose her voice because of a curse. She chose to give it up. She traded original speech for the ability to preserve the words of others perfectly. A walking memory. A poetic tape recorder with heartbreak issues. Apollo approaches her slowly. The wind picks up just enough to flutter the grass. He says, "I tried to sing to silence." Echo repeats instantly, "I tried to sing to silence." But her voice folds the line differently, like a harmony, a reflection. She completes it without changing it. Apollo's brow furrows. "But silence knew my voice." Echo whispers, "But silence knew my voice." Apollo sits in the grass, looks up at her. "I wrote a poem about a cracked amphora." She smiles, just slightly, then says, "I wrote a poem." Pauses. "Cracked." Another pause. "Amphora." He blinks. "Are you choosing words?" She sits beside him. Doesn't answer. Or maybe that is her answer. Here's your mainstream historical drop. Ancient Greek poetry often played with repetition, especially in oral traditions. Echo's story wasn't just a myth, it was a metaphor for language itself, for how sound travels, how meaning decays or grows depending on who hears it. Echo wasn't broken, she was syntax incarnate. Apollo tilts his head. "Can you still feel your own thoughts in the ones you repeat?" Echo looks away, says nothing, then whispers, "Can you still feel your own?" Stops, shakes her head, then suddenly, "Yes." Apollo's eyes widen. "You remember?" She nods, barely, and for a moment the two of them just sit there, sunlight painting their shoulders, shadows slipping like punctuation between their limbs. You, somehow still invisible, watch it unfold like a forgotten stanza, finally being recited aloud. Apollo plucks his lyre, a low, round note, the kind that hangs like a teardrop in a warm room. He says, "If you could speak again, what's the first thing you'd say?" Echo repeats, "If you could speak again." But she stops, stares at the sky, then looks down and whispers, not repeating, but creating, "I would say, thank you." Apollo doesn't breathe for a moment, neither do you. You realize something just happened, something quiet and enormous, something about restoration and rhythm, and how sometimes the right poem isn't written with ink or sung with strings, it's shared in repetition. Echo smiles, eyes glistening. Then she stands, says nothing more, walks into the trees, and is gone. Apollo watches her go, lips parted like a question he forgot to ask. Then softly, "Even echoes can forgive." He lies back in the grass. You follow suit. And for a while, there's only that single note from the lyre, still vibrating in the air like the word almost. The grass cools beneath you as afternoon stretches into its slower half. The part where shadows start reaching long fingers toward the horizon, and every breeze sounds like it's humming a lullaby to the trees. Apollo lies beside you, eyes fixed on the clouds, lyre resting across his chest like an exhausted cat. The silence between you is comfortable now, not heavy, not broken, just resting, like language after a long day of being beautiful. And then, because the universe knows timing better than any god, you hear footsteps, light ones, quick ones, and then the rustling of leaves giving way with the enthusiasm of something about to be interrupted. Enter Hermes, god of messages, trickery, markets, lost socks, and now apparently poetic intellectual property law. He skids into the clearing like a kid late for rehearsal, dust on his sandals and a scroll in each hand. His winged cap is slightly askew, and his grin is too big for his face. "Well, there you are," he announces, pointing at Apollo like he's just spotted a rare bird. Apollo groans, "No." "Yes," Hermes replies. "Don't fight this." He flops into the grass beside you and unrolls one of the scrolls. It's covered in symbols, lines, and what appears to be at least one poorly drawn goat. "I've been hearing things," Hermes says. "Verse in the wind, rhyme in the rocks, particularly poetic snail near Mount Othrys. Word on the street is you've been composing." Apollo sits up slowly, dusting a blade of grass off his shoulder. "Maybe." Hermes taps the scroll. "And have you registered any of it?" "Registered?" Hermes raises an eyebrow. Look, I don't mean to alarm you, but creative rights in Olympus are a nightmare. You've got satyrs scribbling lyrics on tree bark, nymphs setting everything to melody, and now Dionysus is staging spoken amphora performances. You need protection. Apollo stares. You're saying I need to copyright my poetry, or trademark it, or publish a limited edition on olive-pressed parchment? Hermes shrugs.
Honestly, anything that says Apollo was here first. You watch as Apollo tilts his head, considering. You think someone's going to steal it? Hermes nods gravely. Absolutely. Inspiration is like goats. The moment you look away, it's in someone else's garden. He tosses the second scroll over. I took the liberty of drafting a few options, titles, symbols. I even invented a new character for your signature, sort of a flaming A with a lyre wrapped around it. Very dramatic. Apollo peers at the doodle. It looks like a goat trying to play hopscotch. Exactly. Memorable. Here's your mainstream historical tidbit. While the concept of copyright didn't exist in ancient Greece, poets and playwrights were fiercely competitive over original compositions. In some city-states, poetry competitions were judged and recorded, and accusations of plagiarism, though informal, could ruin a poet's standing. Hermes, as the god of communication, would have had thoughts on this. Apollo lies back again. I'm not sure it matters. Of course it does, Hermes says. This is history. And you've finally found something that isn't all about gold or prophecy. It's personal. That means it's profitable. Do you even like poetry? You ask, genuinely curious. Hermes pauses.
Then shrugs. I like what it does. Which is? He grins. It confuses people just enough that they don't notice when you've stolen their sandals. Apollo rolls his eyes. Then, to no one in particular, murmurs, Poetry isn't something you own. It's something that owns you. Hermes snorts. Now that needs a scroll, maybe a t-shirt. He unrolls another parchment and starts sketching furiously. Apollo turns to you. Is this what happens when you write one good metaphor? Suddenly everyone's selling merch. You shrug. Could be worse. Could be a marble statue with your poem misquoted on the base. Fringe tidbit. Several recovered fragments from ancient Athens show signs of popular poems being scratched into walls, sometimes with slight variations. It's entirely possible the first fan edits and bootleg versions of verses were passed around on shards of pottery like secret mixtapes. Hermes is still muttering. Owning poetry is like trying to tax the wind. That's good. Could use that for the slogan, maybe embroidered on togas. Apollo sits up and says firmly, Hermes, I don't need a slogan, I don't need a scroll, I don't need an endorsement from the god of umbrellas and stolen pastries. Hermes looks mildly offended. First of all, umbrellas are practical, and second, fine. If you want your words to fade into whispers and goat-themed open mic nights, that's your choice. He stands, brushes himself off, and salutes you both with a sloppy grin. I'll be back when you're famous and full of regret, he says cheerfully. Then he vanishes in a flash of sandals, leaving behind a single papyrus scrap fluttering in the breeze. It reads, This verse belongs to the sun, but don't think he's the only one, for words like wine and wandering sheep refuse to settle, they prefer to leap. You hold it up. Apollo sighs. I hate that it's good. Me too, you admit. And as the papyrus dances away on the wind, you realize something Hermes probably didn't intend. Poetry might not belong to anyone. But it lives longer when shared. You're not sure how long you sit there after Hermes disappears. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time feels fuzzy now, like a poem that forgot its meter halfway through, but still sounds good if you hum it just right. Apollo hasn't said much. He's watching the last scraps of Hermes' papyrus swirl away on the breeze, his lyre cradled in his lap like a sleeping bird. The kind of mood poets would call pensive, and normal people would call trying not to cry. Then he stands. I'm going to Delphi. You blink. Now? He nods. If I'm going to keep doing this, it needs to make sense to someone. And if there's one place on Earth where people pretend to understand vague symbolic nonsense, it's the oracle's temple. You follow, because of course you do. The journey is shorter than you remember. Maybe the gods are bending distance today. Maybe poetry just makes the road feel softer beneath your feet. Whatever the case, the grand marble steps of Delphi rise before you by late afternoon, sun-bleached and humming with heat. Priests mill about like dust in slow motion, robed in white, faces distant. You pass a line of pilgrims, some weeping, some sleeping upright, one guy nervously clutching a chicken. At the top of the temple steps, a pair of guards blink as Apollo approaches. "Lord Apollo," one stammers. You're early." "I'm always early," he replies. "The sun waits for no man." The guard nods, like that means something profound. It doesn't. Inside, the main chamber is cool and echoey. Incense hangs heavy in the air, curling up toward a painted dome that tells half a dozen stories at once. Zeus hurling lightning, Athena whispering strategy, Dionysus riding a donkey into a wine barrel. And in the center, the oracle, or rather the Pythia, a woman in her 60s, seated on a three-legged stool above a steaming fissure in the ground. Her eyes are half closed, her mouth slightly open, as if listening to a language only stones can speak. Apollo approaches her quietly. She blinks, slowly, then mutters, "You're late." He raises an eyebrow. "They just said I was early." "I meant cosmically." "Ah." The oracle shifts slightly. The steam curls upward. The silence grows sharp. Then Apollo does something no one expected. He starts reciting. Not a prophecy, not a decree, a poem. "I burned for answers once, but all I got was smoke, so now I write the questions down and read them back as jokes." A beat. The oracle doesn't speak. Then she smiles and begins to laugh. It's not a soft laugh, not a wise chuckle. It's a full-throated cackle that echoes off the stone walls and makes a passing priest drop his scroll. "You brought jokes to Delphi?" she wheezes. "Finally!" Apollo bows slightly. "Just one, so far." Historians still argue whether the oracle of Delphi ever laughed, you whisper to yourself. If they knew she once snorted at a god's sad boy stanza, they'd riot. The Pythia wipes a tear from her eye. "Sit down," she says. "Give me another." Apollo lowers himself to the ground like a student in front of a particularly mischievous professor. He hesitates. Then, "The sun doesn't rise, I drag it," like shame behind a clever smile. The oracle nods slowly. Now that sounds like someone who's carried too many titles and not enough days off. She shifts on her stool, the steam billowing up between them like the ghost of a forgotten metaphor. "Tell me," she says, "why poems?" Apollo exhales. "I thought I could predict everything, control it, guide it." He picks at the reed string of his lyre. "But this poetry thing? It's like watching your own thoughts sneak past your defenses." She nods. "That's because prophecy tells the future. Poetry tells the truth." You pause. Let that settle in your spine. Apollo does too. Then the oracle reaches under her stool and pulls out a small clay pot. Not fancy, not divine, just real. She holds it out. "I want you to say something," she says. "One line, right now, something for me to keep." Apollo blinks. "Just one?" "One," she says. He closes his eyes, thinks, then, "Even gods need permission to feel small." She places the pot gently beside her stool. "Thank you," she whispers. Fringe tidbit. Some recovered temple offerings in Delphi contain inscriptions believed to be short poetic lines, not prayers, not declarations, just expressions. Emotion carved into clay. Could have been the earliest form of emotional journaling. Or just really good breakup poetry. Apollo stands slowly, and suddenly you realize something. He didn't come here to prove himself. He came here to see if his words could live somewhere other than inside him. He turns to you, smiles. Not the performative, radiant God smile. A tired, grateful one. "Let's go," he says. You follow him back down the steps, the air warmer now, the sun lower, and somewhere behind you, an old woman still laughing softly into the steam. You and Apollo descend the marble steps in slow motion, as if gravity's been replaced with a gentler tug. The sun is slipping toward the horizon now, bleeding orange across the sky like a ripe peach that someone took one bite out of. Shadows stretch long behind you, and the stones beneath your feet still hold the heat of earlier declarations. Neither of you says anything at first. Then Apollo exhales. "I think the oracle kept the pot," he murmurs, half amused. "She did," you say. "It looked good next to the fissure." He smiles faintly, his gaze soft and distant. "Maybe someone will find it in 1,000 years, misread it, publish it." That would be the most poetic outcome possible. As you reach the temple's outer courtyard, a sudden flutter fills the air. Dozens of wings, a gust of feathers, a swirl of noise, birds, so many birds. They swoop and circle, a tangled flock of sparrows, crows, doves, and one suspiciously fashionable parrot who might be freelancing for Hermes. Apollo raises a brow. Well, this is new. One of the birds, a sleek grey dove with the posture of a poetry professor, lands on the edge of the marble fountain. It tilts its head, stares at Apollo, and chirps. Then it speaks, not clearly, not elegantly, but undeniably in Apollo's own voice. Even gods need permission to feel small. He freezes. So do you. Another bird lands, a blue jay this time. Same line, same voice. Then a crow. Even gods need permission to feel small. Then a pause, and then a cacophony. Every bird in the courtyard suddenly sings the line, not in unison, but in that wild, overlapping rhythm of natural choirs. They echo each other, they distort, they remix. One adds a sarcastic, apparently. Another chirps it like a question. Apollo stares. You've gone viral, you whisper. He covers his face with one hand. Oh no! A pigeon lands beside him and pecks affectionately at his sandal. Then, with unmistakable solemnity, recites, "Shame behind a clever smile." Apollo groans. Fringe tidbit. In ancient times, birds were often seen as divine messengers, especially in augury, the art of interpreting omens through avian behavior. Some poets believed birds were carriers of whispered truths from the gods themselves. The irony of birds now quoting a god back to himself? Delicious. One of the temple priests wanders past, hears the birds chirping poetry, and gasps. "It's a sign!" Another gasps. "It's an oracle!" A third kneels. "It's an album!" Apollo looks horrified. "They're going to turn it into a chant." And they do. By the time you reach the base of the hill, 6 novices are pacing in circles, chanting Apollo's line like it's holy. Someone's playing a pan flute, others trying to choreograph something with interpretive arm movements. It's like watching performance art grow legs and sprint away from its creator. Apollo watches, flabbergasted. "I muttered that to a woman in a cave. He says. "It wasn't even a proper verse." "Doesn't matter," you reply. "It hit the birds. Now it's out of your hands." He rubs his face. "I'm going to be misquoted for eternity, aren't I?" You nod, solemnly, and probably with inspirational font over a landscape background, and he groans louder. A sparrow lands on his shoulder and says in a squeaky attempt at his tone, "I'm not crying, you're crying." Apollo gives it a glare. The bird flaps away, unbothered. Here's your mainstream history drop. Misattribution of quotes has plagued writers since ancient times. Even in antiquity, verses were wrongly credited to famous names for prestige. Entire stanzas of Sappho, stolen, misattributed lines of Homer, everywhere. What you're watching now, the very first misquote meme machine. You and Apollo walk into the olive groves, birds trailing behind like nosy fans. He eventually collapses onto a sun-warmed rock and groans. This is worse than Dionysus writing a wine-soaked opera about his feelings. You sit beside him. He's quiet for a while. Then softly, "Is this what poets feel like? Being heard and slightly misunderstood?" You nod. "Every day." He lies back, arms crossed behind his head, letting the whispers float around him. The birds have moved on to his other poems now. The amphora one is gaining traction. A robin adds a beatbox element. A heron croons it like a dirge. Apollo chuckles. It's not terrible. He closes his eyes. Maybe poetry doesn't need to be mine. Maybe it just needs to be theirs. You let the thought sit with you. Birds circling overhead, fading sunlight warming your arms, and a reluctant God letting go of his grip on meaning. You smile, because that too is poetry. You're still sitting on the sun-warmed rock next to Apollo when the birds finally scatter, like someone hit pause on their gossiping playlist, and they all remembered they had nests to reorganize or worms to yell at. Apollo opens one eye. Are they gone? You look around. Mostly, except for the one raven that keeps circling like it's writing a review. He sighs. If it publishes anything, I want editorial control. You both chuckle. And then, for the first time in hours, there's silence. Real silence. The kind you don't notice until it's wrapped around your shoulders like a soft shawl. Apollo breathes it in. Remember when I was just the god of light, prophecy, and occasional plague? You glance at him. You mean before you became the bard of broken pottery and emotional weather reports? He smiles. Simpler times. Then his face shifts, less amused, more thoughtful. You know, he says, there's something weird happening. You wait. He continues. When I first started this, whatever this is, it felt like I was just making noise, pretty noise, but now... He trails off, fingers strumming absent-mindedly at his lyre. It's not just about me anymore, he says. It's like the words have started to live without me. You nod, because yes. That's what words do when they're born honest. They leave, they travel, they echo in birdsong and temple walls and people's minds when they're trying to fall asleep. Apollo sits up, dusts off his tunic, and narrows his eyes. I want to see where it's going. And just like that, he stands and walks. You follow again, of course. The air is cooler now, the sky slipping into lavender and copper, the kind of evening that would make even a goat feel poetic. After a short while, you realize where you're heading, back to the cave, the mossy, echo-soft amphora-sheltering cave from before. Except this time, it's not empty. There's a crowd, a small one, a quiet one, people, not gods, not birds, just mortals. A few shepherds, a temple scribe, a travelling flute player, a boy with ink-stained fingers and a girl holding a twig like it's a pen. They're gathered outside the cave, listening. To what? Apollo stops in his tracks, listens too. From inside you hear a voice, young, nervous but steady. I don't know how to hold the sun, but I trace its shape on walls. And when the shadows fall too long, I rhyme until they stall. A long pause, then timid applause, the kind that sounds more like rustling leaves than clapping hands. Apollo's expression shifts, wonder, a little ache, a little pride. Someone else steps forward into the cave, a woman this time. She clears her throat and says, "My olive tree forgot my name, so I named it Grief." Now we whisper stories back and forth. One root, one branch, one leaf. More silence, then soft hums of approval. Apollo turns to you. They're doing it. You nod. They're making poems out of the air, of their lives. You both watch as the boy steps outside the cave, clutching a scrap of parchment like it might fly away if he lets go. He spots Apollo, does a double take, and immediately tries to bow and run at the same time. It doesn't go well. Apollo raises a hand. "No bowing, not today." The boy straightens. Did you start this?" he asks. Apollo thinks, not on purpose. The boy nods solemnly. That's the best kind. Fringe tidbit. In the real world, early poetic gatherings, symposiums, were part of Greek tradition. But some texts reference spontaneous verse circles, especially among rural communities, where people would recite short personal lines into the night. No prizes, no records, just memory and moonlight. The woman from earlier walks up, shy but glowing. "Your line," she says. The one about gods needing permission to feel small. I carved it into my door. Apollo blinks. You carved it? She nods. Every time I pass through it, I try to remember I'm allowed to be more than just strong. He has no response, not right away. Finally, he says, that line was half a thought, something I barely meant. She smiles.
It meant something to me. And there it is again, that truth he keeps running into. Poetry doesn't care what you meant, it cares what someone feels. The boy taps Apollo's arm. Do you want to read something? Apollo looks stunned. Me? The crowd quiets. Apollo looks around at the girl with the twig pen, at the shepherd with a wreath of leaves in his hand, at the circle of people who came here not for prophecy but for poetry. Then he nods, steps forward, enters the cave. Inside, the charcoal sketches are still there. The walls hum. The air is soft. He raises his lyre, strums once, then says, I didn't know my voice could bloom until the silence gave it room. I sang expecting sky or stone, but found the world was not alone. A long pause, no applause, just stillness. Stillness that holds him, that hears him. You smile, because for the first time since this began, Apollo's not writing at the world. He's writing with it. And that truly is poetry. After the last syllable leaves Apollo's lips, it doesn't echo, it rests, like a warm cloth over the heart. The cave doesn't respond, the walls don't hum, the wind doesn't swirl. It's just quiet, but not empty, because everyone heard it. They didn't cheer, they didn't cry, they didn't bow or recite it back. They just stood there like people who've been handed a small, beautiful thing and aren't quite ready to put it down. Apollo steps back from the center, hands trembling just slightly. The lyre in his grip feels lighter now. Or maybe he does. You catch his eye. He gives you a soft, sheepish smile, the kind you'd expect from someone who's just survived an emotional ambush they accidentally set for themselves. Outside the cave, the crowd starts to shift. Not away, but toward one another, talking, sharing, swapping scraps of parchment and verses. The shepherd scribbles on a flat stone. The girl with the twig is using it like a stylus in the dirt, sketching out a couplet with surprising intensity. And just when you think this has become a peaceful poetry picnic, someone starts juggling olives. You turn. It's the goat. Yes, that goat. The one with a taste for existentialism and well-timed sneezes. 3 olives, 2 hooves, 0 explanation. The crowd erupts with laughter. Apollo blinks. Why is he... Just go with it, you say. Then a woman, no older than 20, but with eyes like she's already buried a lifetime of dreams, steps forward, hands cupped together. She's holding something small, round, glowing faintly. A laurel leaf. It shouldn't be glowing. Leaves don't do that, but this one glimmers like moonlight, condensed into memory. She offers it to Apollo. I don't know how to thank you, she says, but this came from the tree outside the cave. He hesitates. You want me to take a laurel? She nods. He laughs softly.
That's a little backwards, isn't it? And here's the mainstream history moment. In myth, the laurel tree was sacred to Apollo. After the nymph Daphne turned into one to escape his pursuit, he claimed her tree as a symbol of poetic achievement, crowning victors of song and verse with its leaves. But now, a mortal is giving him one. He accepts it reverently, tucks it behind his ear. The glow fades slightly, not because the magic is gone, but because it's comfortable now, like it's found where it belongs. A boy from the crowd raises a hand. What's your favorite line you've written so far? Apollo thinks, taps the lyre, then says, I tried to outrun sadness, but it was wearing my sandals. There's a beat. Then the goat sneezes again, perfectly on time. Everyone laughs, even Apollo. Then the same boy asks, but why poetry though? Why not just music? Or prophecy? Apollo kneels down in the grass, looks him in the eye. Because music tells you what I feel. Prophecy tells you what might happen. But poetry? He places a hand over his chest. Poetry lets you feel something with me. There's silence again. but it's the kind you don't want to break. Fringe tidbit. In certain early poetic traditions, Ion's poems weren't just entertainment, they were shared space. A way of letting a listener carry a thought, or a grief, or a joy, without having to explain it. Sometimes the point wasn't clarity, it was companionship. The sun is dipping low now, bleeding gold into the clouds like a god, trying not to overdo it. The crowd begins to drift, slowly, reluctantly, like they know they've just witnessed something they'll be quoting in cave scribbles for generations. As they go, many of them whisper lines, little fragments, bits of verse. Some are Apollo's, some aren't. That's the magic now, no one's keeping track. You and Apollo remain. The goat does too, now gnawing thoughtfully on a fig leaf, crown someone probably didn't mean to leave unattended. Apollo lies back in the grass. You know what's strange? What? I don't want to be quoted anymore. You blink. Seriously? He nods. I want people to write their own. A pause, he adds. Poetry shouldn't end with me, it should start with them. You glance at the cave, now empty, echoless, but still humming with invisible memory. Maybe it already has. He looks at the sky. Do you think stars are poems, tiny points of almost understanding? You shrug. Only the ones that flicker. He smiles. A slow breeze curls through the grass. One last bird, probably late to the metaphor, passes overhead, humming what sounds suspiciously like the olive juggling stanza. The laurel leaf behind Apollo's ear rustles softly, and far off, deep in the hills, you hear someone recite, "He sang to silence, and silence made a friend." Apollo closes his eyes, not in sadness, not in exhaustion, just peace. Because now poetry belongs to everyone, even the goat. You don't expect to follow up, not after that gentle finale, not after a god made peace with the fact that his best lines now belong to villagers, shepherds, birds, and one particularly literary goat. But the thing about inspiration, it doesn't do final, it waits. And then it taps you lightly on the back of the head with something new. It starts with a sound, one you've come to recognize in this strange poetic pilgrimage, the unmistakable twang of a lyre string being tuned. Apollo, of course, is already sitting upright, legs crossed, eyes half closed, plucking and tightening and humming as if the world is a draft and he's editing the margins. You watch quietly as he tries a series of chords, low, then high, fast, then slow. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. Then he says softly, "I had a dream last night. I was inside a rhyme. Every door was a metaphor, and none of them opened in time." You blink. You dreamed in verse? "I think so," he replies. "Or maybe I just remembered the dream that way." He shrugs. It's hard to tell now. And you realize he's changed, not just in tone or behavior, but in wiring. The god who once delivered oracles in thunderbolts and solar declarations is now muttering couplets under his breath and checking for symmetry in cloud formations. He's become the very thing he set out to mock, which is perhaps the final transformation poetry demands. Not that you write it, not that you perform it, but that you accidentally become it. He stands. You ready? For what? For the part where I get weird? You raise an eyebrow. You haven't already? He smirks, not weird enough. He begins walking, not toward Delphi, not toward the cave, but down a hillside that dips into a field you hadn't noticed before. And as you crest the edge behind him, you see it. A small circle, stone markers arranged carefully, not ruins, but not quite new. They're spaced evenly, forming a ring just large enough for a few people to sit inside comfortably. In the center, a tall column with nothing on top, a blank pedestal, a stage with no actor. Apollo enters the ring and sits. You follow, a bit hesitant. "What is this place?" you ask. He looks up. The first stage. You blink. Of poetry, performance, people trying to say something to each other without shouting. He runs a hand along the edge of a stone. "I came here once, a long time ago, before temples, before followers, when it was just me and the sky. He taps the lyre. I sang into the wind here. It didn't sing back, but it carried the sound. Fringe tidbit. In some versions of pre-Hellenic mythology, certain meadows and clearings were believed to amplify divine sound, places where the air itself was thinner, more obedient. No written records, of course, just whispers, just echoes. Apollo closes his eyes and strums, one note, then another. You watch as birds gather again, quiet ones this time, owls, doves, a single hawk circling overhead like punctuation. Then Apollo speaks. Welcome to the first poetry slam, no prizes, no judges, just a circle, and the hope someone listens. You look around, you're the only one there. And yet, it doesn't feel empty. He continues, if I sing a line and no one hears it, did I still write it? Or does it hang in the air, waiting for a better listener? You smile. You're asking the right questions now. He nods, and not expecting answers. He places the lyre beside him, reaches into a small pouch, pulls out something strange, a flat, palm-sized piece of clay, still soft, slightly warm. He presses a thumbprint into it, then carves a single line with a stick. This is not my best work, but it's mine. And then he stands, places it carefully on the center pedestal. The first offering. No flames, no trumpets, no ceremony, just truth. Open scholarly debate time. Archaeologists have found ancient tablets with single poetic lines, some personal, some unfinished. No author, no context. Were they practice? Fragments of lost works, or something more like this, private attempts at permanence? Apollo turns to you. I want others to leave something here. You look around. There's no one else. There will be, he says. Someday. And you realize he doesn't mean mortals. He means you, the listeners, the dreamers, the people humming verses on long walks home. He wants you to write something down and leave it behind, not to be remembered, but to be heard, even if it takes centuries, even if it fades. He sits again. The breeze stirs, the sky deepens to amber, and from somewhere behind you faint footsteps approach, not gods, not birds, people. A young man with calloused hands, a woman with ink on her sleeves, a child clutching a single rhyme in their mouth like a secret. They've come, not to watch, but to join. You glance at Apollo, he smiles. See? You don't answer. Instead, you pick up a piece of clay and start to write. The clay in your hand is warm from the sun, rough on your fingertips, and stubborn about what it wants to say. You stare at it for a long moment, not because you don't know what to write, but because suddenly everything feels possible. You glance at Apollo, he's not watching you. He's looking out at the others, the villagers, the strangers, the ones who've wandered into the circle without realizing why. Some carry scraps of bark, some have ink pots. One woman clutches a small piece of broken pottery, the edges still sharp, her thumb wrapped protectively around it. Apollo's not leading, he's just there. Like a quiet breeze you notice only when it's gone. You press your thumb into the clay, then slowly, deliberately, you carve. I listened, and what I heard became mine. You set the clay down beside Apollo's on the pedestal. Not above, not beneath, just next to it. And as you step back, someone else moves forward, the man with the calloused hands. He places a smoothed river stone on the edge of the circle and writes, My wife never understood my poems. That's how I knew they were honest. Then the woman with ink on her sleeves. Her line, I miss things I never had, so I wrote them down. And then the child, too small for parchment, too shy for ink. She plucks a dandelion, holds it up, and whispers, This is my poem. And lets it go. It drifts upward, scattering seeds. Somewhere, a goat sneezes. Apollo grins. You sit down again, cross-legged in the grass. This is becoming something, you say. It already was something, Apollo replies. We just gave it a place to land. He tilts his head. Poetry was always going to outgrow us. And that's the thing, isn't it? You think poetry is what you write. But it's also what people remember, what they change, what they quote wrong but feel right. And now, around this circle of stones, you watch it live.
A woman sings hers aloud, off-key, off-rhythm, but with tears that edit the flaws away. A man carves his into a piece of driftwood with the corner of a seashell. Someone else just breathes their verse into the open air, then claps their hands once to seal it. Fringe tidbit. In early oral traditions, clapping, foot-stomping, or even sighing was used to mark the end of a recited line, an invisible punctuation that let the audience feel the boundary of the thought. You're witnessing that here, in raw form, a language of cadence, not grammar. The pedestal in the center grows cluttered, a mound of fragments, clay, stone, bark, leaf. Each one tiny, incomplete, fleeting, but together they hum. Not audibly, not in sound, in presence. You feel the weight of what's been shared. Apollo watches, quiet now, then he says, I've spent centuries being worshipped. This feels better. You nod, then because now they're not just following you. He finishes the thought. They're meeting me. He sits forward, plucks a soft tune from the lyre, 5 notes, slow and rising. He adds, every god knows how to shine, but poetry taught me how to glow. You look at him. You're starting to sound like one of them. He grins. Exactly. Then from the edge of the circle, an old man shuffles forward. His beard is more poem than face, and his cane is carved with lines so old they've stopped meaning anything specific. He places a crumbling piece of parchment on the stones. It reads, I am 83. My wife once read to me in rain. That was the whole poem, and the whole life. He doesn't stay. He just nods to Apollo and walks off, humming. You exhale. A long, slow exhale. And in the silence that follows, the world feels paused, like the page between stanzas. Open scholarly debate. Some researchers believe the earliest poetic gatherings were never meant to be recorded, that their purpose was in the moment, the hearing, not the archiving. What you're seeing now supports that theory. No scribes, no tablets, just memory as medium. Apollo finally rises. I think I want to teach this. You blink. You're going to teach poetry. He nods. Not with rules, not with forms, just by listening. He looks around the circle. They already know how, they just forget sometimes. Then he turns to the pedestal, lifts his clay piece, blows gently across it, and it crumbles, intentionally. His words scatter like dust. Everyone gasps. He smiles. Now it lives here, he says, tapping his chest. And there, he points to the others. And there, the child says, pointing to the sky. And that is the moment poetry stops being about preservation and starts being about presence. Apollo takes a deep breath. You join him. And around you a quiet chorus begins, voices reciting not together but near one another, not unison but harmony, a meadow of meaning, a dusk of verse, a circle of people who no longer wait for permission to speak the beautiful things they've been carrying. And overhead, the first star appears, just one, but it's enough. The star above blinks like it's shy, like it wasn't expecting to be noticed quite yet, but it stays there, alone in the sky's soft, bruising dusk, quietly observing this strange human god-gathering with mild approval. You sit back in the grass and let the moment settle over you like a blanket that smells of moss and old stories. Apollo is still standing by the pedestal, watching the wind scatter the dust of his poem. You'd think a god might look regretful after undoing his own work, but he doesn't. He looks lighter, as if crumbling the words made room in him for something even gentler. Someone passes by, an elderly woman with white braids and bare feet. She drops a single olive pit on the pedestal and whispers, "My daughter sang to her food. That was her poetry." Then walks away, smiling. You glance at Apollo. He's blinking quickly, suspiciously. You okay? He clears his throat. Allergies. To olives? To memory, he mutters. You nod, and then from behind the circle, you hear a voice you recognize. Oh no, Apollo groans before the voice even finishes its first line. because here comes Eros, Cupid, to the mortals. God of desire, mischief maker, collector of poor impulse control. Wings flared, hair tousled like he combed it with a storm, Eros strolls into the circle, holding a scroll in one hand and a half-eaten fig in the other. "I heard you've been getting emotional," he says with a grin so smug you want to throw a goat at it. Apollo sighs. "Not now." "Yes, now," Eros announces, dramatically waving his scroll. "The god of hot sunlight has been writing sad boy stanzas and inventing a new religion of feelings, and you didn't think to invite me?" He tosses the scroll dramatically onto the pedestal. It unfurls with flair. The title reads, "Love Poems Apollo Wishes He Wrote But Was Too Emotionally Constipated To." Apollo groans into his hands. You, however, are intrigued. Eros clears his throat. "Allow me to begin." He stands tall, wings catching the starlight in fluttery smugness. I aimed an arrow at his pride. It ricocheted into his diary. Now he writes sonnets about birds and cries when olives fall too soon. The crowd bursts into laughter. Even Apollo lets out a reluctant snort. Eros bows. Thank you. I'll be signing fig leaves after the show." Then he pauses. His tone softens just a little. He reaches for another scroll.
This one is less dramatic, folded gently, ink still fresh. "I brought something else," he says, less teasing, more whatever this feeling is. He looks at Apollo. It's about what happens after people fall in love. And then, with unexpected gentleness, he reads, "No one writes poems about the quiet, about the way her hand finds yours without looking, or how breakfast becomes a language, or how the argument you lost became a story you still tell because it meant staying." Silence. No laughter this time, just stillness. Apollo doesn't speak, he just walks forward, lays his hand on Eros's shoulder and says, "That was real." Eros shrugs. Even chaos gets poetic sometimes. Fringe tidbit. While Eros is often portrayed as mischievous and meddling, certain early hymns refer to him as the binder of hearts, not just the igniter of passion. Some ancient poems credit him with inspiring the first human lyric ever sung, before rhythm, before rhyme, just a cry from a chest that suddenly ached. Eros steps back into the circle, sits cross-legged beside a mortal woman and offers her half a fig. She takes it. They start whispering about metaphors. You lean toward Apollo. "You know you've started something you can't stop, right?" He nods. "Good." The stars have multiplied now, turning the sky into a chalkboard of invisible verses waiting to be traced. A fire has been lit at the edge of the clearing. No one started it, not in a normal way, but it burns low and calm, like the earth itself wanted to keep the poems warm. More offerings pile onto the pedestal. A feather with ink smudged on it. A sandal with lines scratched into the sole. A broken mirror etched with 2 words, "Still me." Apollo watches it all, and then slowly, he pulls something from the pocket of his tunic. It's old, cracked, the broken reed string from his lyre, the very first substitute he used back when he didn't know what he was doing, when he just wanted something to hold a rhythm. He steps forward, places it on top of the pile. The crowd falls silent. He doesn't say anything, he just smiles, and suddenly you realize what's happening. The pedestal? It's not for worship. It's not an altar. It's a memory bank, a collection of the moments that made poems possible. Not the polished lines, not the clever rhymes, but the first stumbles, the breaks, the tries. You sit back and let it wash over you, the firelight, the humming voices, the flutter of paper and breath, the slow burning awareness that something permanent just happened in a field where no one planned anything. Poetry was not declared. It arrived. It grew. And now it's not going anywhere. The fire crackles like a punctuation mark that doesn't need to finish the sentence. Around it, the poets, gods, and quiet listeners lean in, not to warm themselves necessarily, but to feel like they're part of something shared. Apollo's sitting cross-legged now, the glow of the flames turning his golden hair a soft bronze. He's got his lyre across his lap, fingers idle, not strumming, but tracing its frame like he's thinking through music with his hands. Next to him, Eros lounges, occasionally flinging grape stems into the fire and pretending they represent all the dramatic love poems he's rejected this week. You lean back on your elbows, letting the sounds drift over you, laughter, murmurs, the scribble of charcoal on bark, the rustle of someone trying to erase a line with a sleeve and accidentally improving it. Then a voice rises, timid, slightly nasal, almost apologetic. I wrote something. It's short. All heads turn toward a nervous young man near the outer edge of the circle. He's holding a piece of parchment that's definitely been sat on, stepped on, and possibly used to wrap a fig. He clears his throat. I wanted to be powerful, so I said nothing. Then someone said something to me, and it broke everything in the best way. The silence that follows is delicate, like breath held underwater. Then applause, not loud, not performative. Just a soft ripple of hands, the kind of response that says, "We heard you. We're keeping that one." The young man blushes so hard he might call me combust. Apollo grins. "That," he says, "is poetry." You glance at him. Even though it didn't rhyme, he raises a brow. Since when is rhyme the point? And there it is, the truth most people forget. Poetry isn't about perfection, it's about recognition. Fringe tidbit. Many of the earliest Greek poems weren't rhymed at all. Rhyme came later, after rhythm, after structure. The earliest forms were closer to song prayers or emotional note-taking, designed to be spoken aloud, not to impress, but to relieve. A hush falls again, not because people have run out of things to say, but because they're choosing their next things carefully. One by one, people step up to the pedestal. They don't perform, they place. A woman lays down a necklace with a single shell. My sister gave this to me. I didn't forgive her until I wrote about it. A boy offers a pine cone with words scratched into each scale. I thought of you. Then I wrote you down, then I let you go. Someone adds a page torn from a book, except the words have all been blacked out except 3. This still matters. Apollo stands quietly, watching. You see something in his eyes. Not amusement, not pride, something gentler, maybe belonging. He turns to you and murmurs, "This is better than Olympus." You smirk. Fewer thunderbolts, more catharsis. He chuckles. Also fewer screaming orgies, which is surprisingly refreshing. The goat bleats in agreement. You both stare into the fire for a while. Then from the shadows a figure emerges, tall, pale, unblinking, clad in silvery robes that shimmer like forgotten moonlight. You stiffen. So does Apollo. "Artemis," he says, his sister. She doesn't say anything at first, just walks into the circle with the kind of silence that makes trees pay attention. She surveys the crowd, the fire, the pedestal of offerings. Her gaze lands on Apollo. "I heard a rumor," she says, voice even, "that the god of reason has been writing feelings." Apollo winces, technically feeling adjacent metaphors. Artemis raises a single eyebrow. "In rhyme?" He nods. She sighs. Then, unexpectedly, she reaches into her tunic and pulls out a small object. It's a tiny arrow, delicate, burnished gold, blunt at the tip. She walks up to the pedestal, lays it down. "I don't do poems," she mutters, then walks away and sits near the fire. You and Apollo exchange looks. That's as close to an emotional outburst as Artemis gets. Apollo whispers, "She once decapitated a constellation for interrupting her alone time." You nod. "So this is progress." He smiles. One of the mortals leans over to Artemis. "Do you want to write something?" Artemis doesn't answer. She just pulls out a piece of leather and slowly begins carving with her knife. The fire pops. Someone strums a lyre. And in the background, the stars have now multiplied into a full congregation. Mainstream fact, Mount Parnassus, the mythic seat of the Muses, was said to be where poetry originated. But historians argue whether poetry truly started anywhere, or whether it simply emerged in every culture when silence stopped being enough. Apollo stands again, walks to the center. He lifts his lyre, strums 3 soft notes, then, there's no crown for this, no temple for it, just the sound a heart makes when it's finally heard. Silence. Not the heavy kind, the sacred kind, the kind you earn. Then the old man with the bearded face says, "I'm writing that on my leg." You glance at Apollo. "You started a literary cult." He shrugs. "It was either this or another plague." You laugh. Somewhere behind you, a tiny voice says, "What rhymes with tomorrow?" And no one answers. Because maybe that's her poem. The night is thick now, velvet, full of possibility. And in this small, glowing circle, poetry is no longer being invented. It's simply being allowed. The fire burns low, but it doesn't fade. It hums, crackles with the rhythm of contentment. Not just warmth, but witness. Like it's heard every line and decided to memorize them in sparks. You stretch out your legs, your muscles ache in the good way, like you've hiked somewhere holy without realizing it. The grass beneath you is damp with dew now, but no one moves. Even the goat has curled up beside a basket of someone's half-written verses and is snoring into a scroll. Apollo's reclined on one elbow, toying with a reed. His laurel leaf is still tucked behind his ear, slightly wilted but shining with that not-quite-earthly glow. You suspect he's forgotten it's even there. Across the circle, Artemis is sharpening her knife. On a stone, with what can only be described as vengeful serenity. Someone offers her a plum. She accepts it with a nod that could mean anything from "thank you" to "I'll spare your village." Poets, it turns out, are terrible at boundaries but excellent at snacks. A young girl approaches Apollo, freckles, missing tooth, holding a bundle of something wrapped in wool. She clears her throat. "I made this for you." She unwraps the bundle and reveals a tunic, too small, slightly crooked, made entirely of stitched-together lines from overheard poems. Every patch is a different stanza. Apollo stares. It's hideous and perfect. He stands, bows like she's royalty, and takes it with the solemnity of a man receiving the keys to a kingdom made of emotions and finger paint. "I will wear this during sunrises," he vows. She beams and skips away. You grin. That's the most meaningful wardrobe malfunction in history. Mainstream fact. Ancient Greeks sometimes embroidered small poems into garments, especially shrouds, ceremonial cloaks, or robes of victory. These were often short blessings or epithets, stitched by hand. None have survived, but fragments were recorded in plays and letters, what you're seeing now. A spiritual revival with more charm and less symmetry. Eros, meanwhile, is trying to convince the goat to be his co-author on a collection titled Odes to Whoever's Hot Today. The goat, to its credit, headbutts him gently and walks away. A voice behind you speaks up, soft, hesitant. I'm not sure what makes a poem good." You turn. It's the shepherd again. He's holding a scrap of bark and a small piece of charcoal. Artemis glances over. "Did it hurt?" He blinks. "What?" "Writing it," she says. "Even a little." He nods. "Then it's good." Open scholarly debate. Scholars still argue whether ancient poetry was judged by form or feeling. Some suggest rigid metrics mattered most, syllable counts, meters, echoes. Others argue that impact, the catch in the voice, the silence after, was the truest measure. You now know where Artemis stands. Apollo, now dressed in the poem-patched tunic like a heroic refrigerator magnet, raises his hands. "I think," he says, "we need to do something bold." Eros perks up. "Is this the part where we declare a kingdom?" "No." "A new genre?" "No." "A dance?" "Dear gods, no." Apollo grins. "I think we need a group poem." A hush, then murmurs, then curiosity. "How?" someone asks. He points to the pedestal. "Each of us writes a single line, no coordination, no explanation. We don't look back. Just one line, then pass the tablet." He pulls out a fresh slab of clay, blank, smooth, waiting. He etches the first line. I dreamt the moon had teeth, then passes it to Artemis. She hesitates, then carves. It bit the silence clean in half. Pass. The stars fell out like marbles. Pass. And rolled into my cup. Pass. So I drank the sky and forgot my name. The slab circles, poets, listeners, gods, goats. The goats line is unclear, possibly grass-related, possibly genius. By the time it returns to Apollo, it's covered in mismatched, unmatched, miraculous lines. He reads it aloud, no editing, no reshaping, just letting it be what it is. The crowd listens like it's gospel wrapped in graffiti. Then they cheer. And not wildly, not performatively, but with the kind of smiles you can feel in your ribs. Apollo places the slab gently on the pedestal, sits back down and says, "There, our first shared poem." You blink. "Our first?" He grins. "We're doing this every week." Eros gasps. "Poetry night?" Artemis groans. "I should have brought wine." Fringe tidbit. Some ancient Athenian symposiums included collaborative poetic games. One person would start a line, the next had to finish it while rhyming or keeping meter. It was considered both entertainment and training, also frequently resulted in tears and wine-fueled debates about whether orange could ever be poetic. It can't. We've all tried. The fire sputters, the stars blink, and someone begins singing, not a performance, just a soft, off-key hum that others instinctively join, a lullaby of shared syllables. Apollo leans toward you. You think this will catch on? You smile. It already has. Because in this tiny, glowing circle of divine mistakes and human honesty, poetry has stopped being a performance. It's become a practice, a habit of being real, a rhythm of being heard. And all around you, that rhythm is rising, one breath at a time. The group poem sits on the pedestal like a loaf of freshly baked weirdness, cracked along the edges, uneven in flow, full of chaotic wonder. Nobody agrees on what it means exactly. But that's sort of the point, isn't it? Apollo stretches like a cat that's just composed a symphony. You know, he says, I've been worshipped for a lot of things, light, medicine, prophecy, plague. But I think this... He gestures to the fire, the slab, the still humming chorus of mortals muttering their own half-verses. This is the first time I feel, useful. You glance over. You cured plagues. Yes, he says, but this doesn't come with side effects. Eros, now lounging in a robe he absolutely did not wear earlier, lifts his goblet. To the birth of poetry night, he toasts. May it forever toe the line between brilliance and embarrassing overshare. The goat sneezes. Artemis slowly draws a circle in the dirt with her dagger and then carves 3 tiny syllables into it. Stay soft. That's it. You stare. Was that a poem? She shrugs. It was preventative violence. You decide not to ask. One of the mortals, a lanky woman with ink-stained fingers and a cloak made of stitched bird feathers, stands up and clears her throat. I think we need a rule, she says. Apollo looks intrigued. A rule? For poetry? She nods. Not about form, about care. The others murmur. She continues, if we're going to keep doing this, writing these things and leaving pieces of ourselves in clay and bark and song, then we need a promise, a shared one. Apollo steps forward. Go on. The woman recites, slowly. We won't laugh at sorrow. We won't steal someone's ache. We'll hold what's spoken like breath and return it whole. Silence. But the reverent kind. Eros sets down his fig. The goat actually stops chewing. Apollo walks up to the pedestal, takes the slab with the group poem, flips it over, and begins carving the promise into the blank side. A soft gasp ripples through the crowd. They're not just playing anymore. This is real. Mainstream fact. Early Greek poetic communities, especially Orphic circles and mystery cults, believed that poetry could touch the soul in ways reason could not. Members often swore oaths not just of silence, but of protection. That a verse once spoken was to be honored, not dissected. When Apollo finishes, he steps back and exhales like he's just pulled sunlight from under his ribcage. Now, he says, it's not just poetry, it's ritual. He grins. I love rituals. Artemis raises a brow. You hate structure. I love structure when I invent it. The mortal woman smiles. We should name this one. Apollo thinks, then shakes his head. No, let it name itself, in the mouths of the people who carry it. And that's how it stays, an unnamed ritual with a clay promise, a poetry circle with no leader, and a fire that doesn't die unless you forget it. As the night deepens, people begin whispering their own lines, into bark, into cloth, into each other's hands. One couple stands hand in hand. They exchange verses like vows. I found you in a line I didn't know I was writing. And I stayed because the rhyme kept unfolding. They kiss. Everyone pretends not to watch, but they're absolutely watching. Artemis glares. If they start composing sonnets about kissing, I'm leaving. Eros claps. If they don't, I'm suing. Fringe tidbit. In the lost plays of the poet Ibycus, there are references to witness poems, short stanzas performed in pairs or exchanged between lovers during festivals, meant to seal emotional contracts. The words weren't legally binding, but emotionally devastating. Later, a little boy with a cracked flute plays a melody that's mostly air and accident. But Apollo leans in close and whispers, "That's a poem too." The boy beams. Then someone steps up to the fire holding a bundle of scrolls. "I've been collecting," she says. "Everything that's been said. Not all of it. Just enough. The ones that didn't blow away." She unrolls them. Parchments filled with fragments. She smiled like thunder apologizing. "Grief is a language I only speak at night. My hands remember who I was even when I don't. I meant to write a poem.
I made soup instead. The scrolls rustle. The fire nods its approval. Apollo rises, takes the scrolls, adds them to the slab, to the pedestal, to the growing pile of fragile, fierce, beautifully unfinished things. And then he
says something strange. "We need a way to carry this forward." Eros raises a brow. "You mean like branding?" "No," Apollo says, "like a vessel, something that moves." He turns to you, and you know instantly what he means. You want a traveller. He nods. One person, every month, every new moon, they take a scroll, a poem, a word, something, and they carry it to the next village, the next valley, the next fire. He looks around. No stage, no audience, just someone willing to walk with a verse. The crowd is still. You can feel the idea landing like seeds in spring. They call it the line walker. No one knows who came up with the name, but it sticks. And just like that, the circle becomes a network, a glowing web of spoken stanzas and trusted hearts. And tonight, you realize you're the first. Apollo places a scroll in your hands. One line written in gold ink. "Don't explain the flame, just carry it." He smiles. "Don't lose it." You grip it tightly. You won't. The scroll in your hand is soft and surprisingly warm, like it's been waiting for you. You run your fingers along the gold lettering. It shimmers faintly, not from any divine glow, but from the weight of intention. Don't explain the flame. Just carry it. You glance up at Apollo. He nods but doesn't speak. Around you, the poetry circle has quieted, not out of fatigue, but reverence. It's the kind of hush that wraps around a decision, like moss growing over a stone that was once sharp. Everyone knows what's happening. You're not just leaving with a scroll, you're leaving with the thread. The ritual is still fresh. Unnamed, unwritten, but it's been born now and it needs a heartbeat. You. "I'm not a poet," you whisper. Apollo smirks. "Perfect. That means you won't try to be clever." Eros adds, "Or worse, trendy." The goat bleats in agreement. You've somehow become the representative of ancient Greek poetry's most eclectic approval committee. You sling a small satchel over your shoulder, Someone's tucked in a flat piece of bark with a verse carved on it. The wind carries words you forget to say. Sometimes they find someone else. It's unsigned. All the best ones are. You rise to your feet. The scroll, the bark, a few folded pieces of cloth inked with clumsy stanzas. They're all part of your cargo now. Not heavy in the usual sense, just sacred. The fire dims slightly, sensing the moment. Apollo stands beside you. There's no map. I figured. No instructions. Of course not. No official title. You grin. Then I'll make one up. He chuckles. That's the spirit. Mainstream fact. In certain Greek festivals, especially in rural areas, travellers known as rhapsodes carried poetic traditions from one village to another. They didn't always compose, sometimes they only recited. Their job wasn't to create, but to preserve, to walk from place to place with verses memorized like breadcrumbs between souls. You step to the edge of the poetry circle. Behind you, Artemis is now quietly etching lines into a flat stone, ignoring the fact that Eros is composing something beside her that rhymes dodecahedron with emotional freedom. Apollo stops you with a hand on your shoulder. One more thing, he says. He pulls from his tunic a small strip of cloth, inked with the word begin. Just that, nothing else. He ties it around your wrist. There, he says, in case you forget. Fringe tidbit. Ancient messengers often wore tokens, woven strings, carved charms, meant not only for identification but intention, a visible reminder of what they were carrying and why. Not for others, for themselves. You start down the path. It winds out of the meadow through olive trees silvering in the moonlight, past the cave that once hummed with divine arrogance and now simply rests like it's done its job for the century. You walk slowly, not because you're tired, but because the silence is richer than you remember. Your footsteps crunch gently. The breeze catches your tunic. The scroll swings softly at your side. Behind you, the fire burns, not brightly, but steady. Just before the curve of the hill blocks your view, you glance back. The poetry circle isn't a circle anymore. It's become a spiral, people moving in and out, writing, reading, speaking, crying, laughing, sleeping, reciting, burning old drafts and starting again. Some stay an hour, some stay the whole night. Some only come to listen. Apollo sees you pause. He raises a hand, not a wave, not a goodbye, just acknowledgement. A quiet nod that says, yes, this matters. Then he turns, sits back down and begins to write. You smile, you turn, you walk, and now you begin. Miles pass like pages. You stop in a grove to sleep and dream in strange couplets. The stars keep talking. I only catch every third word. The next day, you meet an old farmer who hasn't spoken in years. You don't speak either. You just hand him a cloth with a poem that reads, "If the soil forgives you, the seeds will too." He holds it like it's a letter from someone he once was. The day after that, a child gives you something, a rock, plain, round, but with one scratched word, still. You add it to your satchel. Not everything you carry will be pretty, but all of it will be honest. As you walk, people begin to notice. They ask where you're going. You say, "I'm carrying a poem." Most laugh, some nod. A few start writing their own. One woman scrawls a verse on a fig leaf and tucks it in your hand without speaking. You leave it on a windowsill at the next village. You don't stay long anywhere. You're not meant to. You're a line walker now, not a poet, not a prophet, just someone who moves words like water, never owning, only passing. And far behind you, in the circle where this began, Apollo lights a new fire. Someone stands to recite, someone else whispers back. And in that quiet place under the stars, poetry keeps breathing, because you're out there now, carrying the flame. Not explaining it, just being it. You keep walking. The scroll stays at your side like a second pulse. You don't open it. You don't need to. It's not about rereading, it's about carrying. That's the point, isn't it? To let the weight of words shape your steps, not just your thoughts. The road isn't grand, it's dusty, uneven. It smells like thyme and goats, and that particular brand of ancient foot sweat nobody writes odes about. You crest a hill at dawn. Below, a village yawning into morning. Chimney smoke spirals like scribbled punctuation. You hear someone chopping vegetables to a rhythm that might be poetry if you squint. You walk through town slowly. No proclamations, no halo. Just the scroll, the bark, the stone that says still. A woman selling olives eyes you curiously. You a priest? You shake your head. Messenger? You shrug. She studies the scroll. Is it dangerous? You pause, then say, only to silence. She blinks, then hands you an olive. Then you're welcome here. You sit in the square beneath a fig tree and wait, not for something big, just for someone to notice. And they do. A boy, barefoot, hair like static. He plops beside you, chewing on a date pit. What's in the scroll? You consider. Then untie the ribbon. You don't read it aloud. You let him read it, eyes darting over the single gold line. Don't explain the flame, just carry it. He squints. Is it a riddle? You smile. Nope. Is it magic? Sometimes. Can I make one? Already did. He points to a beetle crawling across the dirt. That's a poem. You nod. It absolutely is. Mainstream fact? Ancient Greek children were taught poetry before philosophy, not because it made them smarter, but because it taught them how to see the world, themselves, others. Words gave shape to awe, and awe gave shape to memory. You stay a little longer in that village. Not long, just enough. Enough to give the scroll to someone else, an older woman who sings while she kneads bread. She reads it, kisses it, tucks it in her apron, says, I'll walk to the coast with it tomorrow. There's a boy there who needs to remember what he forgot. And that's it. You're no longer the line walker. You're just a traveller again. And it feels right. You leave behind a small pebble with the word soon carved into it. Someone will find it. Someone will wonder. And maybe, just maybe, someone will write back. You follow a new path now. Through thickets of rosemary, over creeks that burble like bashful poets, into a meadow so wide it feels like a held breath. And in that meadow, a gathering, not divine, not official, just people. Some sit in silence, some read, some cry quietly into their elbows. One man is reciting the same line over and over like a chant. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here. You join them. No pedestal this time, no fire. Just the sun warming the back of your neck and the gentle murmur of verses becoming human again. A girl approaches you. She's carrying a pouch of river stones, each with a word scratched onto it. She pours them into the grass and lets the breeze rearrange them. You read what forms. We wait like rain on old roofs. You nod. That's good. She shrugs. It wasn't on purpose. You say, aye, that's why it's good. Fringe tidbit, the Oracle of Delphi often gave her most powerful prophecies not in direct answers, but in fragments, puzzle poems, so disjointed they seemed nonsensical, yet later matched world events almost absurdly well. Scholars still debate whether that was divine foresight or just the eerie precision of poetic ambiguity. Someone begins humming the rest joint. It's not a song, it's just breath in rhythm, the way wind hums when it finds a shape it likes. You close your eyes and you think of the circle, the pedestal, Apollo. You wonder where he is now, probably still listening.
Probably still glowing. H.
He's not writing the poems anymore. He doesn't need to. You all are. All across the hills, the valleys, the coastlines, the mountain paths, the broken temples and quiet caves, people are leaving words behind like breadcrumbs, not to be followed, but to say, we were here. We felt something. We didn't waste it. Open scholarly debate. Some historians claim Greek poetry was always meant for performance, never for legacy. Others argue the opposite, that every whispered verse was a cry to be remembered, to be carried. But what if it's both? What if poetry is less about being heard and more about making sure you're not the only one listening? You don't know where you're going next, but you do know this. The next time someone asks you what you do, you won't say, traveller. You'll smile and say, I carry things that don't weigh much, but refuse to be forgotten. And if they ask what that means, you'll hand them a rock, or a scroll, or a word scratched into a leaf, and say, write something down, then give it away. You pass a shrine on the third day of walking. It's half collapsed, ivy tangled in its teeth. Some god's name, once carved into the lintel, now reads more like a stutter. A single offering rests at the base, a loaf of bread gone hard, with the crust carved into a message. Please forgive the quiet. You don't know who left it, but you bow anyway, because sometimes silence is the poem. You walk on. The hills roll beneath your feet like someone exhaled too hard and forgot to take it back. Sheep graze in clumps that resemble poorly written metaphors. Somewhere in the grass, a cicada performs an impromptu percussion solo. You pause beside a creek, kneel, splash your face. Something shiny catches your eye, a strip of bronze wedged between stones. You pry it loose. Someone has etched into it. She taught me to love water. I never learned to swim. You smile, add it to your satchel. That night you find a small town where poetry has already arrived. You didn't bring it. You weren't the first. But it's here, painted on walls, scratched into benches, whispered by children playing a game that involves reciting verses while skipping stones. Each splash earns a line. One kid shouts, my socks don't match but they both miss you. Another shrieks with laughter and adds, I told the moon about it, he said same. You ask them where they learned this. They point to the well. You approach and find a tiny scroll tied to the rope's handle. It reads, poetry lives in water. Let it sink or rise. Just let it try. Mainstream fact. Ancient wells often served as informal message boards. Villagers left scraps of cloth or wood inscribed with news, blessings or confessions. A few were even used as poetic receptacles, places to speak with nymphs or the gods below. Words, like water, were meant to be offered. You lower the scroll back into the well. You whisper something of your own into the stone lip. Tell the others I'm listening. No one hears you, except perhaps the echo, which answers, not with words, but with space. That night you sit under a cypress tree beside a baker who says she once tried to write a poem, but it came out too flory. You ask to see it. She pulls a scrap from her apron. He left at dawn. The bread didn't rise, neither did I. You blink. Too flowery? You ask. She shrugs. It's all I had. You press your hand to your chest. It's perfect. She tears off a corner and gives it to you. You add it to the satchel. Later, in a sleepy tavern lit by one flickering lamp and an ambitious moth, you meet a man who says nothing, only slides a napkin toward you. It reads, I've been waiting for someone to read this without looking away. You don't. You meet his eyes. He nods. Nothing more. You leave the napkin on the windowsill. Someone else will find it. Fringe tidbit. In certain mountain villages there was a practice called kleptographia, the stealing of verses. Poets would leave anonymous lines in public spaces, hoping someone would take them, rewrite them, make them new. It was a compliment, not a theft. A way of letting words evolve outside their authors. You lie awake that night, the stars muffled behind drifting clouds. You think of Apollo, of the pedestal, of the first time you picked up that scroll. You wonder where he is now. Then you wonder, what if he's wondering about you too? In the morning, you keep walking. The trail forks, you choose neither. Instead, you walk straight into the hills. No path, no plan, just instinct and rhythm and the sense that somewhere out here, someone is writing something and hoping it gets found. You pass a tree with a carved line. She asked me what time it was. I said, not enough. You pass a rock that says, even my shadows miss you. You pass a sleeping traveller holding a piece of driftwood like a pillow. On it, we don't need to be whole, just legible. Each one a breadcrumb, each one part of the song. Open scholarly debate. Academics argue whether ancient, itinerant poets truly composed on the road or simply recited what they had memorized. But there are records, scattered, dubious, emotional, that suggest some lines were born of dust and road, the kind of poetry you only discover when you've walked far enough to stop thinking and start feeling. You reach the edge of a cliff. Below the sea, you sit. Watch the waves write and rewrite themselves against the rocks, and you whisper, "Dear tide, take this version. I'm tired of edits." You toss a pebble. It doesn't skip. It sinks. Perfect. You turn inland. Start walking again, because the words are still out there, waiting. The sea breeze still lingers in your hair like a forgotten lyric. You don't shake it off. You let it cling, let it hum quietly against your cheek as you move inland again, back into olive groves and meadows where the grass has started composing sonnets to the wind without asking permission. You pass a vineyard where the grapes look like they're eavesdropping. And maybe they are. Everything here listens differently now, because poetry has seeped into the dirt, into the bark, into the pauses between footsteps. You arrive at a village mid-afternoon. There's a market in full swing, but no shouting. The sellers speak in rhymed couplets, badly forced and beautifully sincere. 3 figs for a coin, unless you're shy, then take 4 and just wave goodbye. A potter murmurs verses into each vessel before firing it. I whisper peace into the clay, she tells you. So it survives the heat. You sit beside a fountain. A young man reads aloud from a scroll so worn it's barely holding together. He falters, forgets a line, and the crowd doesn't laugh. Instead, an old man gently supplies the missing word, and they keep going. 2 strangers, finishing each other's memories. You could cry, you don't, but you could. A girl in a sun hat skips by, dragging a wagon full of rocks. She's written a single word on each. Yes, wait, soft, almost, again. She's selling them like candy. You buy one. It says, stay. You hold it for a long time. Mainstream fact, some Hellenistic temples were known for collecting word stones, small tokens left by pilgrims with brief inscriptions, wishes, fears, truths too short for scrolls. The priests didn't interpret them, they just kept them, stored in jars and shelves. It was believed even a single word could earn divine attention if it carried enough meaning. You stay the night, not because you need to, because the stone told you to. In the morning, you find a line etched into the bench where you slept. Sometimes the echo is more honest than the voice. You whisper thank you to no one in particular, and walk. The road narrows again. Gravel beneath your feet turns to soft soil. The woods thicken. Birdsong spills from the branches like improvised stanzas. You pass a tree with initials carved into the bark. Then, beneath them, a newer line. He never came back, but the tree still grows. You sit down because that one hurts, because that one feels too real, because even trees grieve quietly, and now you're part of the listening. Fringe tidbit. Certain groves in ancient Greece were considered memory woods, not for battle or gods, but for grief. People carved poems into trees not to be read, just to be left. Botanists today still find ancient scars in olive trees, names long gone, verses too shallow to decipher. The bark healed, the words stayed. You leave your own mark, not deep, just enough. Still trying. You don't sign it. That's the rule now. Poetry belongs to the leaving. You continue. And on the next hill, something strange. A stone amphitheatre. Small, cracked, empty. Except it's not. As you step closer, you hear voices. Soft, overlapping, not speaking, reciting. One person sits at the centre, eyes closed, repeating a line over and over. I forgive you even if you never heard me. Someone else echoes it. Then another. The whole amphitheatre becomes a murmuring sea of shared cadence. You sit in the back row. You whisper too. I hear you. No one looks back, but you're sure they all felt it. The spell breaks at sunset. A man stands and says, I brought papyrus. People come forward, tear off scraps, write in silence, fold them like prayer, slip them into the cracks of the old stone seats and leave. You do the same. You write, "I didn't mean to stay this long, but you were kind." Open scholarly debate. There's disagreement over whether poetry was ever meant to be written down at all. Plato ironically worried that writing would weaken memory, that it would trap words. Others saw writing as a form of liberation. But what if it's both? What if writing is a way to release what we can't carry anymore? The moon is rising. You keep walking. Just beyond the trees, a woman waits on a stump, holding a lantern. She doesn't speak, just hands you a piece of string. Tied to it, a small pouch. Inside, petals pressed flat. You open the folded paper they came with. He said I smelled like spring. I still do, even without him. You look up. She's gone. The lantern still swings gently. You don't chase her. You just walk on, now with petals in your pocket, now with a little more weight in your heart, now with a little more light in your hands. The road bends west. A new village waits. You don't know who's there, but they've probably written something, and you'll probably find it. And maybe, if the timing's right, you'll leave something behind too. You arrive just as the rain begins, not the kind that drenches, but the kind that suggests. A quiet drizzle, like the sky forgot how to cry, with conviction. Every leaf seems to perk up. The world smells like softened dust and stories that have waited all summer to be told. The village is small, really small, as in 3 homes, a goat pen, and a well with a bucket so ancient it probably has a pension. No market here, no poetry on the walls. At first glance it feels like silence lives here full time. But you've learned better by now. Silence doesn't mean absence. It means potential. You find shelter under a fig tree near the centre, where a small shrine leans precariously toward gravity. Someone once left offerings here. Burnt incense ash still clings to the stone corners, but it's been a while. You settle in and do the thing no one expects travellers to do anymore. You wait. A boy notices you first. Barefoot, hair wild, carrying a bowl of figs like their treasure. He stares. You smile. He offers a fig. You accept. It tastes like a soft memory. "Are you a hero?" he asks. You shake your head. "Messenger?" You shrug. He nods sagely, as if that explains everything. Then he says something that catches you off guard. "Do you want to see the words?" Mainstream fact, in parts of rural Greece, there's a long oral tradition of secret verses. Children's poems passed only among the young. Rhymed riddles, curses, love lines or prayers. They weren't written down. They were whispered in fields, shouted across rivers, sung into caves. Adults forgot them. Children carried them forward. You follow the boy behind a half-collapsed stable. He lifts a piece of wood and points to the underside. Etched in charcoal are dozens of lines, some sweet, some haunting, some hilariously specific. "I saw her cry when she thought the goat died. The goat was just sleeping, but I didn't tell her." Don't trust the man who says he can count the wind. If you eat 3 figs under the moon, your dream will come true. If you eat 4, you'll forget what it was. You crouch beside him. "This is yours?" you ask. He shrugs. "All of ours." You smile. "May I leave one?" He thinks, then nods. You write carefully. "I'm not here forever, but I'm here enough." He reads it, then nods again. "That's a good one." You sit there for a while, trading silence with him like marbles. The rain thickens. Not dramatic, not loud, just more certain now. It beads on your shoulders, slips off your fingertips, drips onto the words etched beneath the wooden plank. Some of the charcoal lines smudge just a little. The effect is poetic. Impermanence made visible. You and the boy sit there, huddled under the stable's sagging roof, like 2 conspirators who've decided that words deserve to be hidden and sacred, and maybe a little soggy. "Do you ever show anyone else?" you ask. He shrugs. "Not grown-ups. They always want to fix the spelling." Fair enough. You offer him the scroll, the one that started everything. You've held it so long it's moulded itself to your hand. He takes it gently, reverently. He reads it aloud. Don't explain the flame, just carry it. He stares at it for a moment, then looks up. Where does it go next? You smile. That's the best part. You don't answer, because it's not your turn anymore. He tucks it into his tunic like something precious and dangerous and alive. And maybe it is. You rise. Thank you, you say. He nods. Then, as you start to walk away, he calls out, "Hey!" You turn. He grins. "I wrote another one just now." You wait. He says, "She left with wet feet, but her words stayed dry. Maybe she was magic. Maybe just kind." You don't say anything. You just hold the moment gently in your hands before letting it go. Fringe tidbit. Ancient Greek households sometimes had what was called a cryptognomon, literally a secret recorder. Not an actual object, but a tradition. Someone in the house, often a child or servant, who kept a private record of small events, thoughts, and overheard phrases. These fragments were never meant to be public. But they survived, in margins, scratched onto pottery, whispered into memory. You pass through the rest of the village like a breeze no one's quite sure they felt. At the edge of town, you stop at a wooden fence. Someone's tied scraps of linen to it. Most are blank. A few carry faint inscriptions, washed out by rain, frayed by time. You tie a strip of your own, no words, just a knot. The message is in the act. You walk on through olive groves, humming with bees that might be composing their own couplets. Your pack is lighter now, no scroll, no instructions. But somehow you feel heavier, in a good way. Like you've been filled with other people's echoes and don't quite want to be empty again. You spend that night in a ruined temple, no roof, a mosaic floor that once told a grand myth, now faded and broken. The god at the center has no face anymore, just an outline where glory used to be. You lie down on the tiles. It's not uncomfortable, it's honest. You dream of ink turning into rivers, of footsteps reciting verses every time they land, of Apollo sitting beside a fire watching another poem be born without him, and smiling, not because he's been replaced, but because he's no longer needed. Open scholarly debate. Some scholars argue that poetry must come from masters, trained, precise, edited. Others insist that the best verses are found scrawled on napkins, whispered in kitchens, or shouted across playgrounds. The truth probably lives in between, leaning toward the place where people stop trying to be brilliant and just try to be true. The next morning, you rise with the sun. You don't take anything from the temple. You just leave one thing behind, etched lightly into a loose tile near the center. You don't have to make a monument, just leave a mark that listens. Then you keep walking, not because you have somewhere to be, but because the world is wide and someone, somewhere, has just written their first poem, and maybe they're waiting to give it away. You walk for a long time, not far, just long. There's a difference. Some days are like that, where the sky holds its breath and time unfolds like a slow poem, line by line, hesitant to rhyme. The road bends lazily through wild thyme and scrubby fig trees, cicadas practicing their syllables in the underbrush. You hum a line you don't remember writing. The sun keeps showing up. I guess I should too. At midday, you reach a crossroads. A literal one, 3 dusty paths and a weather-worn signpost so blank it might as well say, "Here be metaphors." There's no one around, except for the old woman sitting on a rock, weaving a crown out of dandelions. She eyes you the way a cat does, intrigued but unimpressed. "You're the word carrier," she says without asking. You nod. She pats the rock beside her. "Sit. You look like someone whose feet are louder than their thoughts." You sit. She finishes the crown and sets it gently on your head. "There," she says. "Now you're royalty." You raise an eyebrow. "Of what?" She smiles. "Of everything people never said out loud." You both sit in silence for a bit. Then she opens her palm. Inside, 5 smooth pebbles, each inked with a single word. She rolls them around in her hand like dice, then drops them onto the dust between you. They land in a line. Stay quiet until it sings. You stare. She shrugs. That's today's poem. Mainstream fact. The ancient Greeks had a form of divination called rhapsodomancy, the practice of generating poetry or prophecy by selecting random verses or words, sometimes written on shards or leaves, sometimes whispered and caught in jars. It wasn't just fortune-telling, it was listening, a belief that the right line would find you if you were still enough. You write the 5-word poem on your forearm, with ash. The woman nods in approval. She rises, creaks, dusts off her skirts, then says, "There's a village ahead. They have a box." "A box?" She grins. "You'll see." Then she walks the 4th direction, the one not marked, the one that disappears into trees. You take the left fork, because the left always feels a little like a question, and you're in the mood for one. The village is tucked into the fold of a hill. No signs, just laundry lines and the smell of rosemary bread, and a faint, thudding noise like someone trying to hammer a secret into wood. You find the box in the square. It's huge, worn, nailed shut, painted with symbols you can't read and one word you can. Listen, there's a slot at the top. And beside it, a stack of parchment scraps and a bit of charcoal. A child walks up, writes something quickly, folds it and drops it in. You wait until they leave, then you read the instructions etched into the wood. No names, no explanations, 1 line per soul, no peeking. Every new moon we burn the box. The smoke remembers. You stare at the box. You write, "I missed you before you left." You fold the paper, slip it in, and feel
lighter. As you turn to go, an old man taps your shoulder. "Want to help?" "Help what?" He smiles. "Hear them."
He lifts the lid, not to read, but to listen. You hear nothing, then everything. The hum of secrets folded into silence, the soft rustle of pain that didn't know where else to go, the shared heartbeat of anonymous confessions stacked like feathers and anvils. You stand in awe, then close the lid gently. Fringe tidbit. At some seasonal festivals, particularly in Thessaly, communities would burn collected writings, letters, wishes, even anonymous grievances as offerings. They believed the gods favoured smoke over parchment, that some truths were too sacred to be stored. That night the box burns, the villagers gather, no speeches, no explanations, just fire. And the collective exhale of things said, quietly, finally. You watch the smoke rise, curl, scatter. Somewhere Apollo would be proud, but he's not needed here. The poetry no longer belongs to gods, it belongs to people. To the kid writing on their shoe. To the man muttering verse into his soup. To the woman weaving grief into syllables and hanging them to dry on the same line as her laundry. Open scholarly debate. Some historians believe poetry lost its power when it became written, archived, domesticated. Others argue it became more powerful, more democratic, something anyone could make, carry, forget, rediscover. But those scholars weren't here tonight, watching strangers warm their hands on burning paper that once held everything they couldn't say aloud. You write one more line. Not for the box, for yourself. On a stone you keep in your palm as you sleep. Tomorrow I will begin again. And you will. Because poetry never ends. It just takes turns being quiet. Morning wakes you with the slow confidence of a poem that doesn't rhyme, but still makes perfect sense. The ashes of the box still smoulder in the village square, a soft ghost of paper and secrets and smoke. A few children poke at the remains with sticks, not to destroy, just to check that something magical really happened. You smile and walk on. Your path curls through wheat fields, golden enough to feel metaphorical. Every breeze sounds like a stanza. You hum a new line with each step. If the wind forgets my name, I'll answer to silence. By now you've stopped expecting direction. The road goes where it wants, you just follow. Around midday, you stumble on something strange, a stone circle. No temple, no altar, just flat rocks arranged in a careful spiral. Inside, a pile of objects, carved wood, folded cloth, dried herbs, and, at the center, a single poem scratched into bronze. It reads, We leave what we can't keep for those who can't ask. You sit down outside the circle. It doesn't feel right to enter, not yet. A girl arrives, carrying a bowl of water and a dried flower. She places the flower in the spiral and pours the water over it, then whispers something you can't hear. She doesn't look at you, just nods and walks away. You wait. A man comes next. He leaves a peach pit, then whispers, "I should have said sorry," and leaves. Mainstream fact: in rural Greece, certain open-air stone circles served as informal memory wells, non-religious sites where people left objects or lines of poetry, often for the dead, the forgotten, or those lost to war. Some circles lasted centuries. No one guarded them, no one owned them. They simply held space. You write your offering on a leaf. "Thank you for teaching me how to carry quiet." You place it on a flat rock and sit, not waiting, just being. Eventually, a traveller arrives and leaves a sandal with a note tucked inside. "I only ever got halfway there, but it was enough." They look at you, smile, say nothing, then continue on. Fringe tidbit: ancient travellers often left single sandals at crossroads or shrines, not out of carelessness, but symbolism. It meant, "I made it this far." It was a way to mark a journey's pause without insisting it was finished. Many were filled with scraps of verse or clay charms wrapped in twine. Later that day, you pass a crumbling statue. It used to be someone important, probably a king, a god, a forgotten oracle. Now it's just stone with ivy for a beard and pigeons for a crown. Someone has written on the base in paint, "Even glory fades, but kindness echoes longer." You smile and keep moving. Your satchel is nearly empty, just one stone, a folded cloth, a single petal, and a line you haven't written yet. Open scholarly debate. Some say the power of myth lies in the immortality of heroes. Others argue the opposite, that myths endure because of their mortality, their brokenness, their cracks that we see ourselves in. Is poetry the same? A flawless verse may impress, but the flawed one, the one that stutters, hesitates, bleeds a little, that's the one we carry. You reach a clearing. It's quiet, not the eerie kind, the sacred kind, a kind of stillness that makes you forget your own name for a moment. In the center, a fire pit, cold now. Ash settled like soft punctuation. You don't light it, you just sit beside it. And finally write the line that's been following you for days. "This is enough. I don't need the ending to begin." You press it into the ash with your finger. No ink. No parchment. Just intention. You lie back on the grass and let the clouds write above you. They say nothing profound. Just drift. Exactly the way they're supposed to. And for once, you don't need to move. You've carried the flame far enough for today. Tomorrow, maybe you'll carry someone else's. Or maybe someone will carry yours. Either way, the poetry continues. The clouds drift like punctuation, ellipses of sky, commas of shadow. You lie still, watching them reshape themselves with no apology and no reason. You've carried so many words, but right now, blessedly, none of them demand to be spoken. You exhale, not dramatically, just like someone who's learned how to. Your journey brought you here, not to an ending, but to a pause, and the pause is the point. You sit up slowly as twilight bruises the horizon. The clearing around you begins to glow, not from any divine source, but from fireflies. Hundreds of them. Each one a tiny flicker of language you don't quite understand and don't need to. They're their own kind of poetry, short form, untitled, impossible to memorize but unforgettable all the same. Then you hear it, a bleat. You turn. The goat from way back in the early sections stands just outside the trees, staring at you like it's been following this whole time. And honestly, maybe it has. It trots over with the confidence of a creature that once won a poetry slam by sneezing. Tied around its neck? A scroll. You untie it. Open it. Inside, one line. Don't forget to laugh when they start taking it too seriously. You grin. Mainstream fact. In certain mystery cults, laughter was considered a sacred act, especially in rituals involving death or transformation. It broke tension, invited breath, reminded everyone they were still alive and not to clutch truth too tightly. You thank the goat. It sneezes once and wanders off into the firefly-laced woods. Seems fitting. You decide to move again, just a little to the edge of the clearing where a circle of flat stones rests. Someone, or many someones, have etched verses into them, forming a kind of open-air library. Some are barely legible, some fresh. One says, "We thought we had to shout. Turns out a whisper travels farther." Another, "Even gods get tired. That's why we have each other." You run your fingers over them like braille for the soul. Then you find one with your handwriting. You don't remember writing it, but you did. It reads, "I came looking for a voice. I left making space for others." You breathe out. Fringe tidbit. On certain Greek islands, it was tradition to leave a final offering after a long pilgrimage, not food, or gold, or tears, just a story. One never written down, spoken aloud once, then abandoned to the wind. Not to preserve it, but to release it. You sit down, look around. You're alone. So you speak. You tell the story of how it started. The lyre string, the nymphs. The first metaphor, sticky with sap and panic. The trial by goat. The muses on lunch break. The whispers, the haikus, the scroll. The child's poem, the box of burning lines. You speak until the words run out. Not because the story ends, but because you've become part of it, and you're ready to rest. You lie back one more time. Look at the stars. They blink slowly, like they're listening. Open scholarly debate. Some argue that poetry belongs to the young, passion, urgency, rebellion. Others claim it ripens with age, wisdom, ache, time. But maybe poetry doesn't care how old you are. Maybe it only asks, are you paying attention? You are. And because of that, you've changed, not in the big, obvious ways, just quietly. Your gait has rhythm now. Your breath keeps better company. Your silences speak with more courage. So when you finally close your eyes in that firefly-stippled meadow, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like punctuation, a gentle period, a kind comma, a breath between verses. And now, because this has been long and strange and gentle and maybe too poetic for polite company, it's time to drift, to soften, to let go, to follow the quiet where it leads. Here's your wind down. You lie back once more. The grass beneath you is cool and soft, like sleep wearing its Sunday best. The sky darkens just a shade deeper, like it's dimming the lights for your mind. The stars lean in, flickering gently, not to dazzle, but to reassure. You are safe here. The wind has calmed to a hush, barely brushing the tips of the grass. It hums like a lullaby without words. Not because it forgot them, because it doesn't need them anymore. The journey is done for now. You've walked far, listened deeply, spoken gently. And in doing so, you've become part of something larger than story, larger than history. You've become part of the whisper, the one that slips between lines, the one that turns silence into sanctuary. So let your eyes grow heavier without rush. Let your breath lengthen without effort. Let your thoughts quiet themselves, like pages closing softly in the dark. No more to carry tonight, no more to recite. Just rest, just stillness, just you, and the gentle pulse of a world that speaks in poems when no one's looking. You don't need a final line. You are the final line. So sleep, dear listener, let the flame rest. And when you wake, maybe hum a few verses into your tea or carve a single word into your day. But for now, let it fade, let it soften, let it sleep